Use that.
All right, let's try that. Good morning, Mr. Sheldon. My apologies, hospital board budgeting time, and we think we have problems. There's a real challenge there, and so that took us a little longer than we planned. Yep. Okay, so in accordance with the town's procedure bylaw, no decisions are to be made, but rather this meeting is an opportunity for council to have informal discussions regarding various matters. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest given what we've seen on the agenda? There being none, we'll go forward. I'll turn this over to Mr. Sheldon.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Just a very quick overview of today's session for the entire day. So we start out with a presentation on legislative and legal framework, and Esther will introduce our guests in a moment, guest speakers. Then we're going to have a short break and move into the community survey results. We'll have a representative of Forum Research give us a presentation along with Bonnie Muslow from our customer service center. And then lunch, and if it turns out that we need some additional time to deal with the results of the community survey, if there are questions and so on, we'll keep it flexible, so we may work into lunch and have a working lunch. And then at 1 o'clock, we are looking to do an educational training session tour through the town, and the tour will cover a number of points, and I'll speak on the bus about the theme of the tour. We will have a break about halfway through the tour to visit the, we'll still call it the new operations center, so that new members of council can have a quick tour of that, and it will be a break, and then we'll finish the tour. And we are aiming to have everyone back here by somewhere between 4 and 4:30, and I hope that schedule works for everyone. So I think without further ado, so we can concentrate as much as possible on the legal framework, legislative framework, I'm going to turn it over to Esther. Esther.
Thank you very much, Bob. Mr. Mayor, members of council, I'm very pleased to introduce you to Kim Mullen and Bruce Engel from the firm Weirfolds. Kim and Bruce have graciously offered to give up their time today to come and talk to you about your legal and legislative responsibilities. We are very pleased that they are here. Kim and Bruce are both partners of the firm Weirfolds. They specialize in municipal law and carry on municipal practices. Both of them did their education in Toronto, and they have been involved in a number of municipal cases, both for private clients and in the public sector. Kim and Bruce have worked with the town over many years with respect to numerous issues. They've helped us to navigate some tricky legal situations, and we are very, very happy that they offered to come today and talk about something that's near and dear to my heart and near and dear to Andrew's heart, and that is council legal responsibilities and legislative responsibilities. And I should say as well that Andrew was key in really organizing and facilitating this workshop. So my thanks also go out to Andrew and his staff for all the work that they put into making today happen. So with that, I will turn it over to Kim and Bruce.
Thank you. And thank you for the opportunity to come and speak with you today. And I'd also like to thank Andrew and Esther and Bob for all of their help and input in putting the presentation together. Our goal in this session is to provide a primer for new members of council and a refresher for returning members of council on some of the key legal considerations for you as council members. Feel free, if you have questions during the presentation, to ask them, or we'll also take questions at the end. Bruce and I are going to split up the presentation, so we'll do a little bit of back and forth, so you won't have to listen to either of us for too long at any one time. You should have a booklet that looks like this, which has excerpts from some of the key provisions from various pieces of legislation, the three main ones being the Municipal Act, the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act, and the Municipal Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act. And we'll refer to those a little bit, but the main purpose of this handout is really for you to have a takeaway to refer to back in your offices over the course of the term as things come up. So with that brief introduction, I'm going to turn it over to Bruce to talk to you generally about municipal powers and jurisdiction.
So municipalities are kind of unique creatures. They are created by the province. They don't have any constitutional status in Canada, so they are a provincial creature. And as a result, traditionally, they could only exercise the powers that the province gave them. I think that's still true, but the province has tried to give municipalities broader powers by calling them natural persons. So areas such as criminal law, which is a federal jurisdiction, the province can't legislate in, and nor can municipalities. The way the province has created municipalities is that you are corporations, not individuals and not business corporations. You have the power to sue and be sued, to hold real property, acquire and dispose of it, and you can be liable in contract and in tort. It sounds a bit silly, but when you're thinking of an artificial creation, you have to actually go through and figure out whether you have all of those powers or not. Your power to incur debt is strictly controlled. That's a power that the province mostly kept for itself. You can't run a deficit. You go through your budgets each year. And there are procedural and geographic limits to how you act and where you can act. Generally, your powers are within your municipal boundaries, but not exclusively. There are exceptions to that. And you act through council and through bylaws. So a natural person can just sign and say yes. How does this council or this municipality say yes to something? And that's through council passing a bylaw. I'm sure you're aware of the upper tier, lower tier, single tier divisions of municipalities in Ontario, and that can be a feature for when somebody says, well, so-and-so did this somewhere else, it may not work for you because of this tiered structure that you're in. The key in terms of the basic municipal powers is the Municipal Act of 2001, but there are a lot of other acts that you will touch on in your travels. The Planning Act.
If I can ask this a little bit easier, like I'm following along here, but you've really gone beyond.
Yes, Kim, I've gone.
Sorry, we don't have a slide covering what Bruce is talking about right now. We'll get into more specifics as we go on. This is just a kind of overview section.
Sorry. So there's the Planning Act, which may occupy a lot of your time. Building Code Act, Municipal Elections Act, Municipal Conflicts of Interest Act, Municipal Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act, Development Charges Act. There's a whole raft of different sources of jurisdiction and problems for you. But the core of who you are and how you function comes out of the Municipal Act. And with that, I'm going to ask Kim to talk to you about some of that basic framework.
So the Municipal Act, you'll find some excerpts from it in tab 1 of the brief, and I'll take you to some specific provisions. It establishes the basic framework for municipal government in Ontario and sets out some of the basic rules for how municipal corporations can act. So some of the rules that apply that are established by the Municipal Act include what, as Bruce referred to, the legal principle that municipalities can only act through council and must act through bylaw unless it's otherwise provided. And that's found in Section 5 of the Municipal Act. And if you wanted to look at it in the brief, that's on page 1 of tab 1. Section 8 of the Municipal Act provides that the scope of municipal powers is to be interpreted broadly to confer broad authority on municipalities to to enable the municipality to govern its affairs as it considers appropriate and to enhance the municipality's ability to respond to municipal issues. And Section 9 of the Municipal Act, which you'll find on page 2 of tab 1, gives municipalities what we call natural person powers. What do natural person powers mean? Nobody really knows, to be honest. Municipalities don't have the powers of a real natural person. We don't have the same powers as any individual sitting here has. But what Section 9 means is, for the purposes of exercising powers given to municipalities under the Municipal Act or any other statute, they have the powers of a natural person. And again, I can't really tell you what that means because nobody really knows, and frankly, there hasn't been much case law from the courts interpreting that section since it came into effect in 2003. Municipalities have broad powers to pass bylaws in a number of areas. Those include governance structure of the municipality, accountability and transparency, financial management, public assets, environmental, social, and economic well-being of the municipality, health, safety, and well-being of people, services and things that the municipality provides, and protection of people and property. And as you probably know, the powers in a tiered system of government, so where there are upper tiers and lower tiers, the powers of municipal governments are allocated between the tiers. Newmarket is a lower tier municipality within the regional municipality of York. And so within that system, the power to pass certain types of bylaws is allocated between the town of Newmarket and the region of York. Section 11 of the Municipal Act deals with that issue. And if I could ask you to turn to Section 11 which is in tab 1 of the brief. Starting in page 4. You'll see a subsection 3 that sets out a number of things that lower tier and upper tier municipalities can pass bylaws in relation to. Then there's a subsection 4 setting out a bunch of rules for determining how those powers get allocated. Turn over the page, there's a chart which provides some guidance of how to figure out who's got what powers. So for example, item 1 under the column sphere of jurisdiction deals with highways, including parking and traffic on highways. Column 2 says that the whole sphere is assigned to all upper tier municipalities. You see that in column 3. And then in column 4, you'll see that assignment is non-exclusive. So what that means is that all upper tier municipalities have the power to pass bylaws in relation to highways, but it's non-exclusive, so lower tiers can as well. There are some items that are exclusively assigned to the upper tier or the lower tier, or to certain upper tiers and lower tiers. So if a question comes up about whether the town has the power to pass a particular bylaw, this, in terms of whether it's power allocated to the town or to the region, this chart is one way of figuring out the answer to that question. I won't go into details about that, but I'm happy to answer questions about it. Section 14 of the Municipal Act provides that bylaws of a municipality can't conflict with federal or provincial statutes. That's just a codification of a common law principle that has been set out in the Municipal Act. And then Section 23.1 to 23.5 deals with delegation. And it says that the powers of the council may be delegated subject to certain restrictions. That's something that was always the case. Certain powers, administrative powers, could always be delegated. Powers get delegated to the CAO to sign agreements. Powers get delegated to the clerk. But when the new Municipal Act came into effect in 2003, the power to delegate was broadened so that now some legislative matters, so passing bylaws, can be delegated subject to certain restrictions. And what we call quasi-judicial matters. So when the municipality is required to hold a hearing, for example, if you're considering revoking someone's business license, that's also a power that may be delegated to a committee, subject to certain restrictions. Any questions about the Municipal Act? Okay, then Bruce is going to talk to you briefly about the Planning Act.
So one of the key roles that councils play is making decisions on land use planning. That regime is set out in the Planning Act. I'm not going to go into all of the details of it, but there's some process issues associated with taking action on the land use planning front. And the public meetings and public participation are things that are mandated by the Act and are expected when either the OMB or courts are looking at a municipal treatment of an issue. So before adopting an official plan, you have to provide notice, hold what's called a statutory public meeting, which is just a public meeting that conforms with the requirements of the Planning Act, and you have to receive public comment in that process. There's a legal division between holding a hearing, which is quasi-judicial, and legislative decisions, and that runs through the kind of decision-making that you make. So, for example, if you have a licensing bylaw and somebody is up in front of council with a thought that their license might be revoked, it's a lot like a trial. It's quasi-judicial. You're looking at that person's rights. When you're dealing with a zoning bylaw for half the municipality, that's more of a legislative function. You're making law. You're not ruling on somebody's individual rights, except of course you are, because sometimes the zoning bylaw is on my house or my farm, and it feels a lot like you're talking about me when you're doing that. So fundamentally, it's a legislative role, but there's a duty to act fairly as you do that, and a lot of people get very heated about what you think they can do with their own land. In the process, you will have a circulation of the application, which is to say you solicit input from all of your departments and from other bodies and conservation authorities and anyone else who may have an issue, as well as the region. Staff will synthesize all of that, bring it forward for a report at the same time as you're receiving the public input, so that the public has the opportunity to be informed. Whether they choose to avail themselves of that is another issue, but the information base is there, and it all comes to you in that process. From there, you are not the end of the line. If an applicant or a person who's participated in the process doesn't like it, they can appeal to the Ontario Municipal Board. Municipality at that stage becomes a party at that hearing, and with special obligations and expectations, but it is a tribunal that is standing in your shoes in terms of the ultimate decision that's being made. And there are mechanisms where they're supposed to pay some deference to council's decision. They're supposed to have a look at the things that were in front of you and at the decision that you've made. And so the more informed your decision is and the more seemingly reasonable your decision is, the more likely the board is going to say, I'm not going to tell Newmarket what to do. The more rash and intemperate your decision is made out to appear, the more likely the board's going to say, okay, I'm going to step in and fix this one. And so the whole process of circulation and staff report, and you don't have to accept your staff's advice. It causes implications if you don't, because you're not going to be able to call them as witnesses at the OMB. Because they're going to stand up and give the same opinion they gave you in the first place. So you'll have to get outside consultants to cover that. But that whole process is something which gets reviewed at the board, and the better your process, the more inclusive it is, the more likely your decision is to stand up.
We had a situation where people were expecting council to direct staff to come to certain conclusions. Can you address that?
Yeah, you can't. And the moment you did, then you're discrediting whatever staff's opinions are on that matter and more generally. So you have to treat your staff as, in effect, independent professional advisors. They're independent in the sense that they're not driven by council's agenda. They're very much driven by Newmarket, and they know Newmarket and the history here and history of all these properties. But you need their independent opinion. You need their advice. And you don't have to follow their advice because you may hear things from the public, you may have something from the region, you may have other sources of input, and your decision is the one that's to be respected. But if you turn that advice into something which is stage managed to suit your purposes, it will discredit that entire process.
Was there at one time a ruling that talked about without fear or favor? That staff provides their advice without fear or favor?
Yeah, that's the general, in terms of being civil servants, that they're supposed to be able to bring good advice to you without fear or favor. They're not supposed to be punished for giving you the straight goods. And just as, you may receive legal advice from me in closed session, and we can come to that later. I may not always give you good news, but you don't necessarily want me to give you good news if the good news isn't there. And people get angry sometimes with people who don't tell them what they were hoping to hear. But it doesn't do you any good to do that. And it's important that staff feel that they have an environment where they can bring their honest views to you. Now that's different. If you have somebody in the staff or a department where you're not feeling they're actually doing the homework they're supposed to do, performance management issue, they're not really doing their job properly, that's a separate issue. But that's the issue of, well, what you're telling me is something I don't want to hear, is not something you want to be trying to
Manage.
You want to just take it as it comes and then deal with it. And dealt with properly, you're still able to say thank you for your advice. I think we need to go in another direction on this one. And I recognize the risks and the challenges that come from the advice you've given, but we're still going to do that. And if done, again, sensibly, that's within your jurisdiction and should be respected.
Good. I have Councillor Kerwin and Councillor Vey.
Just a question on that. I've been a member of this council for 35 years now. I have never, in my history of being on this council, ever believed that a member of council has asked a member of our staff to make an unprofessional judgment, to render a decision that's not professional. I hope you follow my direction. To the best of my ability, it has never happened. At least I haven't heard about it.
Not in Newmarket.
But if it had happened, would it not have been the responsibility of the mayor to bring that council in for discussion on something that's absolutely inappropriate? And in other words, I do not believe that any member of council should interfere with a professional who's in the planning department and tell them how to make a decision that goes against their professional judgment. At that time, I would believe that is it not the purpose of the mayor to as the leader of this corporation, which he is, to address that?
Councillor, you're absolutely right, and I wasn't suggesting it was happening. I'm just saying that from time to time, when we get into conversations with constituents, they suggest that we can provide that kind of direction.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to highlight it here
That
because we
is-
have new members here, and
That's a
it's good for
great
us to
point,
refresh.
Tony.
Yeah.
You know, to me, that's just well, you would have to resign from council.
Well, I think it happens in other municipalities.
Okay, I'm
and
glad to hear it.
That's why I'm giving it the heads up. I'm happy to hear that you, in 35 years, haven't seen it happening here, and that's important. It's the right culture to have.
Yeah, I've had phenomenal guidance by our CIO.
Thank you. Councillor Vague?
When we do get development applications, they are circulated to different parties for their input. One of the most significant circulations is to the Conservation Authority. And if the Conservation Authority turns down an application, they have reasons for objecting to it or saying, no, we won't approve this, and then council says, okay, based on that, we're not going to approve this application, is the applicant able to go to OMB to appeal that? So basically, they're appealing a council decision, but they're really appealing, for example, a Conservation Authority decision, but they're trying to get through the back door what they can't get through the front door. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, there's an interesting interplay in terms of Conservation Authority's jurisdiction. They do have a fill permit. They have certain regulatory things where you need a permit from them. They also have a stewardship role where they're a commenting agency in terms of the decisions you make, which may go beyond just you're not getting anywhere until you get a permit from me. Mm-hmm. And so to that extent that they're making that kind of input and you act on that, yes, that can be appealed to the board. And they can say, well, Conservation Authority was against it, the region was against it, these trees should be protected. But they're not ones where they need a permit from the Conservation Authority. Then yes, that's something the board can review and look at the evidence, and if those trees are being protected for reasons other than all the good reasons that conservation authorities and everybody else wants to protect them, the board might say, there's something funny here. You're being vindictive, or you're doing, but as a general principle, if the evidence supports the protection of that area, then the town would be called on to defend it, the decision that it had made. The Conservation Authority, you would hope they would also come to defend it, but it could be challenged at the board.
How much weight, we know council's decision often doesn't carry as much weight as we'd like it to carry at OMB, but how much weight does the Conservation Authority, if they say no, they said no, we're not going to approve this and we've got our reasons why, does that carry a lot of weight at OMB?
It should, depending on how they made the decision. The evidence is critical for that. For example, one of the things that day one on development applications is the applicant will go out and stake the top of bank, for example, right? And that is a regulatory determination by the Conservation Authority, and they will meet on site with the surveyor and say, that's your development limit. Stay 10 meters back from that, and from the falling down the hill perspective, you'll be okay. That almost never goes to the board. Everybody accepts that that's the process. I had one recently where somebody was challenging that, but as a general principle, that's one which the board would look at and say, why are you here? Have you not staked that? The Conservation Authority said this is the line. That's the line. But conservation authorities do more than just that. And so depending on the strength of the evidence, I think as a default position, municipal positions reasonably arrived at, and conservation authority decisions from a developer's perspective, those are hard to challenge. They should, there's a strong policy framework from the province in support of all of those things, and so I would think that they'd be given a fair bit of weight unless you've got something compelling. If I were on for a developer, I'd have to say I've got some compelling science to say you're wrong, and none of you were prepared to look at that because you didn't want to, because you had too many neighbors or something, some other reason. But if I don't have something compelling, I'd be telling my client, you've got all the government authorities lined up against you. I don't think it's going to go well.
Thank you.
Thank you. No, I don't want to impose on your time, because I understand that's being provided to us pro bono. So maybe I'd like to go through the promotion. Yep.
I sit on the Lake Simcoe Regional Conservation Authority for the past 4 years. But the Conservation Authority, once again, I'm always impressed by the quality of the staff. But the Conservation Authority is a very powerful organization, and they make decisions absolutely professional. And we just have a new CAO at the authority who's goes beyond professionalism, but it is a very powerful, and when they make a decision, it is rarely ever overturned by the Ontario Municipal Board because it's been based on sound, technical, professional judgment.
Thank you. Esther, did you want to make some comments? Or?
Save that till later, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Yeah, let's go through the presentation, then we can come back to questions, and that way it might make this a little more efficient, and we'll get through our timelines, okay? So go ahead.
I'm going to move off the Planning Act and turn it over to Kim.
So outside of the planning process, and sometimes within it too, sometimes a member of the public will take issue with a municipal bylaw or other decision and challenge it in court. There are a few different ways that can happen. A person can bring an application to quash a bylaw under Section 273 of the Municipal Act. There's a limitation period, what sometimes people refer to as a statute of limitations on that. That application has to be brought within 1 year of passing the bylaw. But that isn't the only remedy that a member of the public may have. They could also apply for judicial review to the divisional court, especially when council is exercising a quasi-judicial function like a licensing decision, and can also bring an action, a lawsuit for damages and for other relief, including quashing a bylaw, in which case that has to be brought within 2 years of the decision. Typically. And there are a number of grounds on which a municipal bylaw or other decision can be challenged. The main one includes illegality or ultra vires in legalese, which means that the bylaw is outside the municipality's power. Either it's something that they don't have the authority to do under the Municipal Act, or it's something that some other level of government has the authority to do. Violation of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. I'll talk about the Charter a little bit later in the presentation, but that is another ground for challenging a bylaw. Division of powers. I alluded to this a minute ago, and Bruce talked earlier about the fact that because municipalities are created by the provincial legislature, they only have the powers, the same analogous powers as the province has under the Constitution, so they can't legislate in areas of federal jurisdiction. And they also can't legislate in ways that conflict with provincial legislation. Vagueness is another ground. The general principle is that a bylaw has to be sufficiently clear that a reasonably informed person can know what he or she needs to do to comply with the bylaw. So if a bylaw doesn't meet that standard of clarity, it can be vulnerable to challenge. Bad faith is another ground. The test for bad faith, although it gets alleged often, the test is very high and it's hard to establish it. In order to establish bad faith, what a person has to show is that a majority of the members of council had an improper or collateral purpose or some kind of ulterior motive in taking the action that was taken. Bias is another ground, which again is hard to establish in the municipal context. In the judicial context, when you're dealing with a judge or a tribunal member or some kind of judicial decision maker who's making determinations of legal rights, generally you have to show that the person is completely free from influence. But in the municipal context, councillors campaign on platforms and are elected based on the platforms, and that often involves taking positions on certain matters. But the fact that a councillor has taken a position on a certain matter doesn't necessarily mean that they are disqualified from considering that matter by reason of bias. So, for example, if somebody has campaigned in opposition to wind farms, and a wind farm application or wind farm project comes before council, you might find the proponent of the project saying, well, so-and-so is biased, or the council's biased because so-and-so has said that they're opposed to wind farms. But that's not the test in the municipal context. In the municipal context, as long as, again, the majority of the members of council are amenable to persuasion, which means that they are prepared to consider alternate views, then the council is not biased. And that's a recognition of the fact that council is a decision-making body, but that councillors are municipally elected officials who are entitled to hold views on matters of interest to their constituents. And then the final ground for challenging a municipal bylaw is discrimination. This isn't discrimination in the human rights sense of treating people unfairly, but discrimination in the sense of having different rules applying to different types of, or having different rules applying, for example, to the same kinds of businesses. It used to be the case that municipal bylaws regularly got struck down on the basis of discrimination. I was involved in a case a number of years ago where there was a licensing bylaw in a municipality near Toronto that had different licensing fees for regular video stores, back when there were still video stores, and higher licensing fees for adult video stores. And the bylaw was challenged in court on the basis that it unlawfully discriminated because you can't treat different categories of video stores differently. We were successful in defeating that application, but also now under the Municipal Act 2001, municipalities are specifically given the power to discriminate. That's in Section 8, which allows municipal bylaws to distinguish in any way that the municipality feels is appropriate. So the old cases about discrimination are less and less relevant to municipal bylaws. Bylaws that are passed in good faith can't be quashed for unreasonableness or supposed unreasonableness. That principle is found in Section 272 of the Municipal Act. And the doctrine of estoppel generally doesn't apply to municipalities. I'm not sure if anybody is familiar with the doctrine of estoppel, but it basically applies in a situation where someone in a position of power has led a person to believe that a certain result will take place. So, for example, if you're dealing with a corporation and the president of the corporation says, yeah, we'll sign that contract, or yeah, we'll do that, we'll do this, and then later the corporation doesn't follow through, sometimes the doctrine of estoppel, or what's called the indoor management rule, will apply to make the corporation bound by what the president said would happen. That generally doesn't apply when you're dealing with a municipal council, because again, municipalities can only act through the whole council and only by bylaw. So there are a few rare cases where a municipality has been found to be bound by promises made by the mayor or other members of council or senior staff, but they're very, very rare. As a general matter, it takes a decision of the entire council to bind the municipality. And another thing to keep in mind, which is good news from a municipal point of view, I mentioned, the old days with the cases where municipal bylaws got struck down routinely. It used to be the case that the courts treated municipalities not as a level of government that deserved respect, but more as kind of a subordinate decision maker and that they couldn't be trusted to make reasonable decisions, and the courts would regularly interfere with municipal decisions, would regularly quash bylaws for all sorts of reasons. That started to shift in the late 1990s, early 2000s. There were a couple of decisions of the Supreme Court of Canada that said no court should show deference to municipal councils when they are acting within their jurisdiction. And then when the new Municipal Act came into effect in 2003, it also, through sections like Section 8, which talks about municipalities being given broad powers, it indicated an intention on the part of the provincial legislature that municipalities be treated as responsible governments. And so increasingly the courts are showing deference to municipal decisions when they're being challenged in court. So as long as a municipality is found to have acted within its jurisdiction, generally the court will defer to the municipal decision, even if it doesn't necessarily agree with the municipal decision. Any questions about that before I move on? I'm going to talk a little bit now about the roles and responsibility of council and staff, which is always a topic of interest. If I can ask you again to turn to the brief in tab 1 on page 13. You'll see section 224 of the Municipal Act at the bottom of the page, which sets out the role of council. So it's the role of council to represent the public and to consider the well-being and interests of the municipality, to develop and evaluate the policies and programs of the municipality, to determine which services the municipality provides, to to ensure that administrative policies, practice and procedures, and controllership policies, practices, and procedures are in place to implement the decisions of the council, to ensure the accountability and transparency of the operations of the municipality, to maintain the financial integrity of the municipality, and to carry out the duties of council under this or any other act. The mayor is the head of council, and the role of the head is set out in section 225 and 226.1. The role of the head of the council is to act as chief executive officer of the municipality, to preside over council meetings so that its business can be carried out effectively and efficiently, to provide leadership to the council, to provide information and recommendations to the council with respect to the role of council, to represent the municipality in official functions, and to carry out the duties of the head under this or any other act. And then as chief executive officer, the head is required to uphold and promote the purposes of the municipality, to promote public involvement in the municipality's activities, and to act as the representative of the municipality, both within and outside the municipality, and to participate in and foster activities that enhance the economic, social, and environmental well-being of the municipality and its residents. Turn over the page, you'll see that the role of staff, municipal administration, is set out in section 227. The role of the officers and employees of the municipality to implement council's decisions and to establish administrative practices and procedures to carry out council's decisions, to undertake research and provide advice to council on the policies and programs of the municipality, and to carry out other duties required under this or any other act. So the staff and council roles are distinct. Council gets staff's advice, and based on that advice sets the policy direction of the municipality, and then staff implements that policy direction. Individual members of council cannot direct staff. Only council as a whole can direct staff. And it's important to keep in mind that some members of staff are required to act independently by statute. So for example, the chief building official cannot be directed by council when it comes to issuing a building permit. He or she must make that decision based on the requirements of the Building Code Act. The clerk, when running an election, is required to act independently. And if the clerk is the head under the Municipal Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act, as he is here, the clerk is required to make decisions under that act independently and without direction from council. It's important also to keep in mind, and this comes up in particular in the planning context, that a number of members of staff are professionals and members of professional associations and are governed by their own professional standards. So for example, engineers are members of the Professional Engineers of Ontario and are bound by legislative and other requirements. Planners are members of the Ontario Professional Planners Institute and the Canadian Institute of Planners and are bound by requirements. So they have professional obligations that they have to comply with, and those obligations will inform their advice to council. Did you have a question, Mr. Mayor?
Councillor Penzance, did you want to wait till after, or did you want to ask your question now?
I'm happy to take the question now.
Whichever you prefer, Mr. Mayor.
Can we get through the,
Sure.
the presentation? We might have the answers to the questions as we later on in the presentation, so we'll come back. Put your name back in the queue there, though, so we'll make sure that we come back to you. Okay? Thank you. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. In the case of the town staff have delegated authority from council to undertake a number of responsibilities through certain corporate administrative policies and procedures. There's also a delegation bylaw in place that delegates certain authority to staff, and the procurement bylaw also delegates certain authority to staff. And if there are any specific questions about those, I would suggest that staff deal with those questions. And now Bruce is going to talk to you about council meetings and procedures.
And I approach this with some caution because I think you've got people in the room who have great experience at running council meetings. and the pandemonium that can sometimes erupt, and the guidance you can get from those who've done it, and from the clerk in terms of how it's run. You get motions on the floor, they need a seconder, somebody wants to make an amendment to it, somebody else has a separate motion, you want to debate this one, which one are we on? And then the public stands up and say, wait a second, I want to talk again. Learn from your colleagues and find a way to get through it. From a legal perspective, you do act by bylaw. On less important matters, you can pass a resolution that doesn't need to have a bylaw, but generally the bylaw is the way to go. Those are passed by majority vote and must come under the seal of the corporation, be signed by the clerk and the head or presiding member, and that's when you've got something that somebody can say, I've got the bylaw. There it is in writing. There is a practice of having a confirmatory bylaw at the close of each meeting. So there's lots of things that happen in a meeting. Some of them are resolutions, some of them are decisions, some of them are votes. And the confirmatory bylaw is an effort to say, if you need to show a bylaw in support of a decision, we've got one, because it kind of wraps up everything. The ones that you really know are bylaws will be listed as separate. What they don't get covered in the confirmatory bylaw, there will be a separate instrument for each of those. The question of quorum is something to keep your eye on as long council meetings drag on and people need to step out for various reasons. You need to have your majority here, and every once in a while, maybe not so much on this council, but some where it's a very large number of people, you look around the room and suddenly realize you've got a problem, get somebody back in the room so that you actually have quorum, because otherwise you're not deciding what you thought you were deciding. You must have a procedure bylaw. Part of that procedure bylaw in the parliamentary process is that you don't get to go back and revisit decisions that you've already just made just because you weren't happy with the fact that they were made. Although some people want to try that, and depending on the workings of the bylaw, there can be a requirement and a process with a higher bar to say, can we reopen something? Occasionally that happens because you've got massive agendas, things go quickly by, and a particular councillor says, whoop, hold on, I just missed that one, I wanted to hold that one. And usually that's a routine saying, okay, we can actually bring that back, open it up again and discuss it. But where it's hotly contested and decided on its merits, the procedure is not to allow a free revisiting of that whenever somebody wants to bring it back to the floor. One councillor, one vote is the general rule. There are exceptions in the province, but and in general, your meetings must be open to the public, and there's a strong support for that in the legislation, and courts are very concerned of making sure that that's dealt with properly. There's a bunch of very legitimate reasons for holding something in closed session. It used to be called in camera, and those are a enumerated list of items where it's not the sort of thing that you ought to be required to do in public. I do know municipalities who do it in public anyway, because that's their decision. I've given legal advice in open session with my opponents at the OMB sitting there listening to it. And generally that's certainly open and transparent. I'm not sure that you necessarily want to be doing that. But that's, again, a decision for you to make. There's certain things, for example, you're dealing with a senior staff issue or something. That's not something that should be dealt with in public, and that's listed on the list there. So, and education and training sessions can also be included on that. There are procedures for dealing with things in camera and minutes and a process. You can't vote on something and decided in closed session, except procedural matters and directions to staff. So once you take advice and so on, and have your understanding that you need to get from the closed session, if you're going to take action and debate and decide an issue, then you, for most of them, you have to do that in open session. It's important to maintain the confidentiality of closed session matters. You go into those sessions for a reason, and whether you're on one side of an issue or not, it'll come back to you later. So the documents that are dealt with in there are not public documents, and it's not for any individual councillor to make them public. The discussion that was held is behind closed doors, stays behind closed doors. The minutes of that, of what was dealt with, do not become public. And the only thing that may not be confidential is an outcome. But again, there's a limited number of things you can actually deal with substantively in closed session. So directions to staff can be given. And so that direction obviously can't remain confidential if you're going to actually direct somebody to do something. But beyond that, it may not be a fully public matter, because you may just be able to communicate it to staff saying, this is what we want done. So it's vitally important for the function of council that when you do have those limited times when you go into closed session, that you respect the I'll call it the sanctity of that, and the process. Any decision that is dealt with in closed session and then seen to be jumped through in, for example, a Planning Act matter that's supposed to be a public debate, supposed to have a public meeting, and be decided in open session. If basically you decide it all in closed session, pop out into open session and say, all those, mover, seconder, all those in favor, might well get quashed. It's happened. And so you have to be careful to get the advice, and then remember that if it has to be a public process with open debate, then have that debate in open session. There is a section that's up on the screen from the town's procedure bylaw that deals with all of those requirements, and it's important that again, for the functioning of things, so that where you're allowed to not just receive the advice and the other issues, but also discuss them behind closed doors, that you respect each other's ability to have those expressions stay behind closed doors. And it will come around to your benefit sometime when you have the other side of the issue on the next matter. And that's, again, part of the challenge of being a public body is you're responsible to the public. You form your decisions as a group, and the challenges and the balancing that goes on is supposed to be on public display for most things. For that limited list of items, it's important that the opposite apply, and that the closed session matter be respected. So enough about that. The next one is municipal conflict of interest. Sorry, have I jumped ahead? Okay, sorry, Kim's going to do some accountability and transparency issues, and then I'll deal with the other one.
Right. So from closed meetings to transparency, thought this was a good transition. The accountability and transparency of municipal government is one of the paramount governing principles under the Municipal Act. One component of transparency is to have policies. The Municipal Act requires municipalities to have policies dealing with a number of matters. Those matters are listed on the slides, and the town has policies in relation to all of those matters. The specific references are there. So there's a policy, for example, with respect to the sale or disposition of land, and one with respect to hiring employees, procurement, and notice and accountability and transparency. The Municipal Act also allows municipalities to ensure transparency and accountability by establishing a code of conduct, by appointing an integrity commissioner to inquire into possible ethical violations and breaches of the code of conduct, by appointing an ombudsman, an auditor general, by establishing a lobbyist registry and appointing a lobbyist registrar, or by appointing a closed meeting investigator. And in the absence of a closed meeting investigator, the provincial ombudsman performs this role. The town has a number of these transparency measures in place. There is a council code of conduct from 2007, which was reviewed in 2013. And an integrity commissioner is appointed, I believe, on an ad hoc basis and was appointed twice during the last term of council. There is no external auditor general who has been appointed, but the town does, as it's required to do, have an annual audit of its financial statements as required by the Municipal Act. And part of that audit includes a review of the town's internal controls. Newmarket does share an internal auditor who's employed by York Region. That internal auditor undertakes an annual risk assessment and develops a work plan in consultation with the CAO and the audit committee. And those audits include reviews for efficiency and internal controls, and so mimic or resemble some of the functions that an auditor general would perform. There is no permanent lobbyist registry in Newmarket. There was one created for the N6 waste collection RFP that was administered by the town on behalf of N6, and there's no lobbyist registrar. The closed meeting investigator authority was delegated to Amberley Gavel Limited. There's been one closed meeting investigation undertaken, and the recommendations of the investigator were adopted by council. One area where transparency is very important is with respect to expenses. Under the Municipal Act, the municipality may pay remuneration and expenses of members. The treasurer is required each year to provide an itemized statement of the remuneration and expenses paid to council members in the previous year. That statement is a public record. It's important for municipalities to have an expense policy in place setting out what is and is not an allowable expense, and Newmarket does have an expense policy. It's corporate policy 1-07 and has an appendix A which sets out guiding principles for determining what is and is not an acceptable expense. With that, I will turn it over to Bruce to now talk about the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act.
Just one final point on what Kim was describing there. That list to me of ombudsman and closed meeting investigator and all those things, it's important to have that all in place. It's sort of like all your emergency services. When you're invoking them, it's like calling 911. You don't want to be having to do that. It's nice if you have to, but the less you have to do with any of that, the better things are running. So that's it's a difficult time when you're invoking any of that, those procedures. Municipal conflict of interest, which is another potentially difficult time, has historically been a big pitfall for members of council, and particularly a learning curve for new members. It applies to members of council and to local boards, and it prohibits councillors from participating in the discussion or voting on any matter in which they have a pecuniary interest. It also prohibits them from attempting to influence the vote on matters in which they have a pecuniary interest. That can be direct or indirect. If you're a shareholder, director, or officer of a private company, I'm not sure there's any controlling shareholders of public companies here, but that's a possibility as well. If you're a member of a body that has an interest, or you're employed by a person or a body that has an interest, then you can have a pecuniary interest. Interest of a parent, spouse, or child is deemed to be the interest of you, if it's known to you. Pecuniary interest itself is not defined in the Act, and it, by definition, in English words, it related to involves money. Doesn't matter how much it is, doesn't matter whether it's seen as an interest up or down, and if it might be seen by the public to affect your interest, then that's the sort of test that the courts look to. There are some limits on the scope of it where the interest might be so remote and insignificant in its nature that it's not likely to influence the member. That's not your determination, that's on an objective standard, reasonableness. If it's an interest in common with electors generally, then that's not a disqualifying interest. And if it relates obviously to remuneration, salary, and so on, because that's inherent, it'd be very hard otherwise to deal with it. So, if you have a pecuniary interest in a matter and you're present at a meeting where it's coming up, you have to disclose the interest. I think you heard the mayor raising that at the outset of this meeting, the opportunity to disclose. You can't take part in any discussion of the matter. You can't attempt to influence the vote, whether before or after the meeting. So I know I can't vote. I'm not going to take part in the debate. I'll be working it behind the scenes. That's not supposed to happen. And if the meeting's in closed session, you're required to leave the meeting. If you're not at a meeting where something comes up on the agenda and you've missed that meeting, but had you been there, you would have disclosed an interest, then you're obliged to disclose that interest at the next meeting. So, how does this get enforced? An elector can apply to a court for a declaration that a member has breached the act. And if a judge finds the member has breached the act, with a certain caveat, the judge must declare the member's seat vacant and disqualify the member for 7 years and can order restitution. The judges do have the power to avoid disqualification, so they still found a conflict, but if they find that the breach was committed by inadvertence or an error in judgment, then the penalty doesn't, they don't have to impose the penalty. So it's a very harsh regime, and it's important, obviously, to be vigilant about compliance with it. It's an important regime in the sense of, obviously, public confidence in municipal decisions is there because you're not voting to line your own pockets and you're not voting to help out your friends and family and that obvious sort of corruption. And there are some instances where that gets raised. There's an awful lot more where it is seemingly just harsh and or overreaching. So that's fine, but protect yourselves by being vigilant about it and not giving anybody the opening to come after you. So in that respect, you can't rely on municipal staff to give you that advice. That's their duties and responsibilities are to the corporation and not to the individual councillors. And so they also don't know about your family and about your business connections and any of the rest of it. And so you have to get your own legal advice on that issue. Now there are some, the municipalities are able to have insurance that can reimburse you for expenses of one of these applications, but it can, under the Act, it's only allowed to have a policy that will reimburse you if you're found not to have breached the Act. So if you are found to have breached the Act but found it was inadvertent, the insurance doesn't cover it, so you're on your own. So there's a penalty by itself in the sense that you can have substantial legal expenses to resist the challenge, be successful in the sense that you were found to have done it inadvertently, but still not be able to have reimbursement of those expenses. So that's an important distinction. If you're found not to have breached it at all, then the insurance can kick in. So there, I think judges have got a sense of what this act is about. It took them a while. I think there was a period when it was fairly harsh in terms of their treatment of it. I think they've moved in the other direction, and there were recent decisions relating to a couple of mayors in the GTA that, in my view, we're a signal that the courts are going to be a little less vigilant about stomping on things which are really not the kind of corruption that this whole thing was aimed at trying to stamp out. Having said that, they may give you some hope, but still be on your guard, because particularly it's usually a politically motivated challenge, and judges tend to know that, but it's still not a process you ever want to get into, so don't give people that opening, and step aside, declare your interest, and don't participate, and leave it to your colleagues to deal with that particular issue. And unless there's any questions on that portion, I'm going to hand it back to Kim.
I'm going to speak to you a little bit about municipal records and the Municipal Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act, which is a mouthful, so we call it MFIPA. Municipal records are under the Municipal Act are required to be accessible to the public and may be inspected at any time by any members of the public, subject to MFIPA. And that includes bylaws, resolutions, minutes, records considered at meetings, and the expense statements that are prepared by the treasurer. Municipalities are required by the Act to preserve and retain the records in an accessible manner. They may pass a record retention bylaw, in which case records can be destroyed in compliance with that bylaw. Municipal records are generally subject to MFIPA. I've given you some excerpts from MFIPA in tab 3 of the handout, but I'll just talk to you generally about it. The purpose of MFIPA is twofold. It's to provide a right of access to records held by government institutions and to protect the privacy of personal information held about individuals that's held by government institutions. There's a tension, obviously, between these two purposes, but generally what MFIPA means is that records that are in the control of the municipality must be disclosed on request by a member of the public unless an exemption set out in the Act applies. There are some exemptions that routinely are invoked when you're dealing with municipalities. There's an exemption in Section 6 of the Act for draft bylaws and records of deliberations during closed meetings, so those are exempt from disclosure. Record is a very broadly defined term in the Act. It's defined in Section 1, and it basically means any record of information, however recorded. And it can include emails, it can include text messages, it can include notes, it can include videotapes. I don't know how you get your voicemail messages here, but at our office, we get them on it comes on the phone, but it also comes in the email as an audio file. That kind of audio file can be a record. Personal information is also defined in the Act. It includes the address, employment history, financial information, that type of information about an individual. There's a procedure set out in MFIPA for seeking access to records. Access decisions are made by the head, as designated under the Act, or as delegated. And as I mentioned before, the head has to make the decision on an access request independently in accordance with the requirements of MFIPA. The way that it works is usually there's a request that's received, the requester has to pay a small fee. If third-party records are involved, so let's say the town has a public-private partnership with a private sector entity, then the third party may need to get notice of the request, and then the head has to make a decision on the request within 30 days unless there are reasons to extend the time, for example, if a third party has to be given notice. And personal information is exempted from disclosure except in certain circumstances. Once the head makes a decision, if the requester is unhappy with the decision, then they can appeal to the Information and Privacy Commissioner. And the Information and Privacy Commissioner, I can tell you from years and years of dealing with them, they are very focused on the issue of access. Other than in the case of personal information, the Information and Privacy Commissioner will almost without fail order disclosure of records on an appeal. That's just my personal experience anyway. The head is usually the clerk or another individual designated by bylaw. Here in Newmarket, the head is the clerk. An important, a helpful thing for you to keep in mind as councillors, which is that your constituency or political records are generally not subject to MFIPA, and that's based on the idea that the only records that are subject to MFIPA are those that are in the custody or control of the municipality. As councillors, you're not employees, you're also not officers of the municipality, so your constituency records, for example, your emails with ratepayers, generally are not subject to MFIPA. That being said, if the records are about municipal business, and if they are not constituency records, so for example, let's say you receive an email from a resident with an issue, and you forward that email to a member of staff, and then there's a conversation between the staff member and you and the ratepayer on the issue, that record would likely be considered to be about municipal business and in the custody and control of the town, and therefore would be subject to MFIPA and could be disclosed. Now, I said councillor records aren't subject to MFIPA, but that's not the case for the mayor. The mayor is considered to be an officer for the purposes of MFIPA, and so the mayor's records are subject to MFIPA and can be disclosed. And that's very important because it means that any records of the mayor in the mayor's office are subject to disclosure. I've advised other municipalities in situations where the mayor has used his or her email account municipal email account to deal with all sorts of personal business, and then the question arises, are these records in the custody or control of the municipality? Are they subject to disclosure? So a best practice for you, Mr. Mayor, is to keep the town business and personal business separate, because any records in your office or on your computer could be subject to disclosure. Very good. I like to see that. And again, text messages. Keep that in mind. Text messages, to the extent that they can be retrieved, those can be disclosable. That's something that is becoming increasingly an issue. As individual members of council, you don't have any special right of access to records in the control of the municipality. As council as a whole, you can direct staff to provide you with information that you need, but otherwise, as councillors individually, you're like any other person who wants access to a municipal record. MFIPA also prohibits the collection of personal information by an institution except where it's authorized by the statute or it's used for law enforcement or necessary for the proper administration of an authorized activity. And personal information that a municipality collects can only be used for a purpose that's consistent with the purpose for which it was collected or with the person's consent. Municipalities, and this means the head when responding to an access request, can't disclose personal information except as in accordance with the Act, as permitted by the Act, or for a purpose for which it was obtained or a consistent purpose, or to allow an officer or employee of the municipality to carry out his or her duties, or to comply with federal or provincial law. And individuals have a right of access to their own information and to request corrections to information. So, for example, a local resident may make an access and correction request saying, you have this information on file about me, but in relation to my property, wherever it's incorrect, I'd like you to correct that information, and that's a decision that would be made by the head. Here in the town, the delegation of the power of the head has been delegated to the clerk. The town has a protection of personal information policy, which is corporate policy 1-08, as well as a records retention policy, corporate 1-06. And that policy has some appendices dealing with classification, retention schedules, and records management guidelines. And staff is also working on a routine disclosure policy. Routine disclosure is one of those situations where an access request can be refused. So, for example, if somebody requests information or records that are routinely disclosed or that are publicly available or will soon be made publicly available, the head can say, "I'm not going to grant this request because these records are routinely made available." A couple of other,
Sorry. Just before we move on to that, aside from personal information, there are, with the two devices, there are also community organizations that you can be involved in that, again, may make their way onto Newmarket
Yes.
servers and emails and so on. So, for example, and this was a staff example, but city solicitor and clerk in a municipality was on Children's Aid Society board, and I don't think the Children's Aid Society was subject to the same disclosure obligations, but somebody wanted to get in and went to the municipality and said, I want all the lawyer and clerk records relating to the Children's Aid Society stuff, and it was, the emails were there, but it was and I believe the
Yeah.
head, on appeal, they said disclose it, and then the
Yeah.
court said, because I suspect judges have some personal emails as well, that might go through a government server, and they said, no way. So,
Right.
sometimes there's a saving grace there, but just keep that in mind, that if your standards are more open, then people will sometimes look at that through a back door and say, I really want to get that organization's records, but I can get it through Newmarket and your use of your email. So it's just something to keep an eye on.
and also as an indication of the bent of the Information and Privacy Commissioner, that was a case where the Information and Privacy Commissioner ordered the municipality to disclose the records, notwithstanding the fact that, on any reasonable interpretation, they weren't municipal records, and the court overturned the decision, and the IPC has now recognized that and has changed its approach to those kinds of matters, but it just kind of shows you what the default position is. So we don't have much time left, but I'm just going to briefly touch on a couple of other matters. This slide is now as of last night, out of date. Bill 8 was a piece of legislation that was introduced in 2004, originally as Bill 179, but it died on the order paper because of the election. It was reintroduced as Bill 8, the Public Sector and MPP Accountability and Transparency Act. It received second reading November 19th, and it was passed by the legislature last night, or yesterday. So now, and I have to be honest, since last night I haven't had a chance to review the as-passed legislation to compare it to the second reading version, but the intent for, in terms of what's relevant for the town's purposes, the intent of the legislation was to provide the provincial ombudsman with enhanced jurisdiction to oversee the municipalities, universities, and school boards. Right now, the as of yesterday, the ombudsman's only jurisdiction over municipalities was to conduct closed meeting investigations where a municipality didn't have a closed meeting investigator. The new legislation, as it was drafted at least a few weeks ago, would give the ombudsman the jurisdiction to investigate decisions and actions of the municipality, of any municipality, either in response to a complaint or of his own volition, and the power to review and reopen past investigations conducted by municipal closed meeting investigators, and to conduct his own closed meeting investigations where a municipality's closed meeting investigator decided not to conduct an investigation. So yeah, you may be seeing the provincial ombudsman getting involved in the town's business a lot more frequently. Another proposed piece of legislation to be aware of is Bill 52, the Protection of Public Participation Act. Like Bill 8, it had been introduced in the previous session and died as a result of the election, but it's been reintroduced and it's received first reading. And its aim is to discourage SLAP lawsuits, strategic lawsuits against public participation. That's where somebody is trying to discourage a member of the public from speaking out against a project, for example, and sues them for libel or defamation. And if it's passed, what it will do is establish a fast-track procedure for the courts to review SLAP lawsuits, and if a lawsuit is determined to be a SLAP suit, so one that isn't really meritorious but is just trying to intimidate somebody, then the court will have the power to dismiss them. Workplace violence and harassment is another issue to be aware of. In 2009, the Occupational Health and Safety Act was amended to include a number of sections dealing with workplace violence and harassment. And all employers, including municipalities, are required now to have policies with respect to violence and harassment and to review those policies annually and to develop programs to implement the policies. They're also required to assess the risk of workplace violence arising from the workplace. The town has a couple of policies to be aware of. There's a violence-free workplace policy and a harassment and discrimination-free workplace policy. And if you have any questions about those policies, our staff would be happy to assist you with them. The Human Rights Code is also something that you need to be aware of. It applies to municipalities and to municipal bylaws. It prohibits discrimination, which is, differential treatment based on the grounds that are set out in the code in a number of areas. The areas that are relevant for municipalities are services, accommodation, employment, and contracts. And the prohibited grounds include race, ethnic origin, place of origin, citizenship, sex, sexual orientation, family status, disability, a number of other grounds. And it's important for you to be aware of it both in your role as the council of the municipality as an employer and in your role as a legislative body. Human rights issues are becoming increasingly relevant in the area of land use planning, and that's where the prohibition on discrimination in accommodation comes into play. I was involved in a case a few years ago in the city of Kitchener where they had passed a bylaw that established limits on certain types of accommodation, and that was challenged on human rights grounds, and the OMB actually dealt with the human rights issues in the hearing. Minimum distance separation requirements for certain types of uses like group homes are something that the Human Rights Commission is getting increasingly involved in and takes the position that having minimum distance separation requirements for uses like group homes is a breach of the code, that it discriminates against people based on disability. The Commission is becoming very active in the area of land use planning around zoning and other bylaws. And as an employer, you need to be aware of the obligation not to discriminate in employment or to allow harassment in employment based on the grounds that are protected in the Human Rights Code. The final area that's going to talk to you about today is the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. I mentioned it earlier. It's part of the Constitution of Canada, and it applies to government action, which includes action by municipalities. Section 52 of the Constitution says that any law that's inconsistent with the Constitution is of no force or effect. And Section 24 allows a person who thinks their charter rights have been violated to apply to the court for a remedy, which can include striking down the law. The rights that are protected by the Charter include freedom of religion, freedom of expression, equality, life, liberty, and security of the person. Unlike in the U.S., property rights are not protected by the Charter. But the Charter can get engaged with respect to municipal bylaws when you're dealing with issues like sign bylaws, for example. We've acted for the town of Oakville over a number of years on a number of challenges to their sign bylaw. One of them went all the way to the Supreme Court of Canada, where the bylaw was alleged to violate the right to freedom of expression in the Charter. We were successful in the Supreme Court of Canada because we were able to establish that although there was a violation of the right to freedom of expression, that was a reasonable limit on the right to freedom of expression, which is permitted under Section 1 of the Charter. So Section 1 allows reasonable limits subject on rights if a certain test set out in the Supreme Court of Canada's case law can be met. And a lot of challenges to legislation or bylaws are really won or lost on the issue of Section 1. It's very hard to establish that a right isn't, it's easier to establish that a right has been violated. The fight often comes down to whether that limit or violation is one that can be justified under Section 1. And an important thing to keep in mind in that respect is that when it comes to Section 1, the process is really important. When it comes to establishing a reasonable limit on a right, it's very helpful to show that the municipality, say the town passed a sign bylaw, that the town studied the issue for a period of time, that it had reports from staff, it had reports from consultants, it held a number of public meetings, it solicited the views of stakeholders in the billboard industry and other stakeholders, and that it took all of these steps before passing the bylaw, because then in those circumstances the court will be much less likely to interfere with the municipality's decision about where to draw the line. And with that, whirlwind tour, which we've gone a little bit over time, but hopefully not too long.
Okay, I have two.
I know that there were some questions.
I have two councillors in the queue. Wondering if, and then maybe what we'll target is 1:45. Maybe we'll take a short break and then come back. So we'll deal with questions. Councillor Bazance?
Thank you very much for your presentation. And I'm now trying to remember back exactly what my question was, because there's a lot of information that transpired since then. But it was tangentially related to the passage of Section 8. And so I think in part you've answered, you don't really know yet what the implications are. But when you were talking about the role of staff versus role of council, and in decision making, that while it's generally prudent for council to consider staff advice in making a decision, if there are sort of external factors such as they've done all of the other things that you just mentioned and come up with a decision that's counter to what staff might have advised. My question was, is there some provision that even though staff is required to implement or carry out council's decision, that if there's still some discomfort that staff have a recourse, or do you know what I'm getting at?
Right.
Is that where they would go now, to the ombudsman under Section 8, so that then council's decision could be subject to external
Well, the
review?
ombudsman doesn't have the power to reverse council decisions, thankfully. Staff gives their advice to council, and council takes that advice and takes in all of the other information that it has, then makes a decision. And once that decision is made and the direction is provided, it's staff's responsibility to carry out that direction. And if there's a disagreement about that, then staff may have to decide what that means for them personally. But there isn't any statutory provision that would allow staff to say, no, I'm not doing what council has directed.
It has to be
to
a
do.
lawful direction.
Yes,
That's where staff get to balk. If you're asking them to do something that's not legal, then nobody's going to expect that they will faithfully carry that out for you. But subject to that, they may not like it. They may have thought it was a foolish decision, and it's going to cause them all sorts of extra work and waste the municipality's money and whatever else. Well, you've spoken. That's your decision, and they're to implement it, and they'll report back saying it cost us, wasted all sorts of money and caused all sorts of extra grief, and that's why we're in the trouble we're in now, but that was your choice. And so then you can reverse you can revise your plan from there, but they're supposed to carry it out.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Sheldon?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was going to add to that, the point came up earlier about, if staff are ever faced with an issue where there's undue pressure placed on them by a member of council, and it could even be the mayor, the role of the CAO also kicks in there, that if I am provided with advice from staff that is occurring, then I have an obligation to call, first to talk to the mayor if that is not where the pressure is coming from, but then to meet with all of council to set that out for council. So there is that safeguard as well, in addition to policies that we have in HR. If it goes beyond pressure and it gets into that area of harassment or bullying or whatever the situation is.
Thank you. Esther?
Just very briefly, Mr. Mayor, and to follow up on Kim's point, I just attended a conference on Friday with the Deputy Minister to discuss this bill. So we do know, and I think this is actually going to be the subject of a further report and review between Andrew and myself. We're going to sit down and really dissect what the impact is for us and report to Council on that. But just very briefly, we know that the mandate of the legislation is very broad, and that the Ombudsman will be able to review any decision, recommendation, act, or omission in the course of administration. So basically, administration is everything that we do to implement Council's decisions. But the good news is that the Ombudsman's role will be limited to the extent that we have internal processes and appeals in place. Those will have to be exhausted first, such as, we have a process in place for closed meeting investigations. So if there's a complaint around that, our current process would have to be implemented, used, and exhausted before the Ombudsman would be entitled to come into that role. So, as I said, this will be the subject of a report coming to Council where we can have a fuller discussion about the implications.
Thank you. Councillor Vague.
Thank you, and well, thank you very much for your presentation. You put so much information into a very short period of time. Really appreciate all the work and you coming here. And Esther, you did start to address one of my questions, so I'm going to wait for that report. Just a very quick question, though. If I can, and hopefully it's a yes or no answer, can an applicant, can a developer appeal a Conservation Authority decision to the OMB? So even before Council has done anything, they didn't like what the Conservation Authority said. So is the Conservation Authority decision appealable directly like that?
Yes and no.
Oh, I was hoping it'd be one or the other.
So if it's the decision about issuing a permit, there is, as I recall, an appeal to, I think it's the Mining Commissioner. It's not the OMB. So there is an appeal route for the actual issuance of a permit. Their other decisions are comments on applications and positions that they're taking. And no, they can't independently take that straight to the board. They have to wait until you've made your decision or have failed to make it within time, and then challenge that at the board.
Okay, so the follow-up question, and maybe, Mr. Before, if the Council makes this decision based on the information the Conservation Authority gave us, so that in effect, if it goes to the OMB, a developer is really appealing that Conservation Authority decision, if we based our decision on that.
They're appealing your decision,
right?
And your decision was informed by the position taken by the Conservation Authority,
right? And
so that will be scrutinized in the evidence at the hearing.
Okay, and that does carry a lot of weight, the Conservation Authority in a hearing, a lot more than municipalities sometimes.
Well, in the sense that they have recognized expertise in the areas that they're commenting on and dealing with. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Good.
Just further on that point that Bruce talked about, we did have a situation, and it wasn't the Conservation Authority. In that case, it was the region where there was a dispute on a regional condition contained in a town site plan agreement. So the process is, the appeal is of the town's site plan agreement, but in fact, the fight was with the region on the regional condition that was included. So that's unfortunately our appeal route, or the developer's appeal route, but we were able to get that resolved. The region and the developer worked it out, but the town is unfortunately brought into that appeal. We don't have a choice, and that's the process that we have.
Thank you.
Well, that's a condition that the region asked the town to include.
Yeah, so sometimes we're bound by what.
Technically, it's your condition that
Yes.
you've imposed, and that's why they appeal it, but you've done it because the region asked for it.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you. A couple of items is, I've made a practice when I was first appointed to council, or first elected to council, to get independent legal advice from an independent lawyer. And the reason I did that is that you can disclose all of your information to the lawyer with a degree of confidentiality, yeah. But what happens is all too often, an issue will come up, And if you go to someone who's not familiar with your background and your family and all of those things, they're not able to respond as well. So I'd encourage people to seek independent legal advice now, so that your solicitor is armed with the information that they would need to advise you in very short order. That's just a personal recommendation. The other item that you referred to, some of the check mechanisms that we have, and you reference it to 911. And I'd like to come back. We've had some discussion on an as-needed basis appointing an integrity commissioner. And to me, that's kind of akin to looking in the phone book if you need to make a 911 call. So we really need to give some thought to having at least an integrity commissioner that is recognized, or is the preferred vendor, or whatever it is we do, so that if we need to engage an integrity commissioner on short order, we have the ability to do so instead of having to wait until the next council and then subsequently appoint that. So that's another consideration we might want to give some thought to as we go forward. So thank you very much. Again,
I have a question.
Yes, Councillor Kerwin.
Just a question, I don't know whether you can answer it or our commissioner. The Water Safety Act after Walkerton, crucial to me. Are we going to have a presentation on that separately?
Mr. Nohammer? Yeah.
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor, Councillor Kerwin, that has been arranged, and it is part of the council workshop to be delivered on February 2nd.
And also the Accessibility Act, will that be a separate presentation, and councillors' responsibility on that act?
Madam Commissioner?
Mr. Mayor, I believe on February 2nd there's a number of compliance training, and so it will include some of the HR policies as well. So that all will occur on the 2nd of February.
Okay, thank you very much.
Good. Well, again, thank you. I'm not unmindful that this was a pro bono presentation. We appreciate that, and it's been very informative for us. So thank you for the time that you've taken to help our council better understand. And I think situations will surface that we'll probably need some clarification on. So it's good to have the general framework in place, and at least we now know when it's time for us to ask questions, and that's what's really important. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
We don't need a motion to receive or anything, do we? Because this is a workshop. Okay. Okay, so we'll take a short break and reconvene, say maybe at 11 o'clock. Is that good? Okay, thank you.
I'm going to Aurora, and I have a few things I have to look after. I might be a little bit late again.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Okay, I think if members of council would take their seats, we would probably see that we have quorum. So for the benefit of members of council, if there's things that you want to come back to and or members of council who missed this presentation, this is being live streamed, and so you can go back and look at it in the live streaming capacity of it, so that's good. Yep. Okay, Mr. Shelton.
Just on that point on the live streaming, that means that the material is available for any member of council that could not make it today, and also for staff members as well to see what what the orientation looks like and to get the information. So now we move to the second part of the morning program, and Bonnie will introduce our next speaker. Bonnie.
Bob?
Oh, I don't. I just forgot.
Yep.
In June and July of this year, the town of Newmarket conducted a community survey, and it was deliberately aligned with the timing of the municipal election. And the intent is for the information in this survey to be shared with council to help you decide and inform you regarding your priorities and the setting that you'll be doing for the next term of council. The approach that Newmarket takes to citizen-centered service delivery is very much aligned with the Institute of Citizen-Centered Service. And that is a public sector organization within arm's length of the federal government. And they do a lot of research into citizen and business expectations around service delivery across Canada from all three levels of government. They also own the Common Measurement Tool, and the CMT is a data bank of questions that we can use to satisfy our residents about citizen levels of satisfaction and levels of importance around all the services that we provide. When we benchmark our results against other organizations, we're comparing ourselves with municipal, federal, regional government, as well as other nonprofit organizations against people and individuals and organizations that are truly committed to citizen-centered service delivery. It's also important to remember that the CMT is constantly revitalizing their questions, and we've been using a number of questions over the course of our last 4 surveys. One of the things that has come out in the ICCS research over the last 10 years is that the citizen level of satisfaction with service delivery is very much a driver around the confidence people have in their government. So in other words, the higher level of service that we provide, the more confidence our residents will have in the services that we provide, and that in confidence in their elected officials as well. Forum Research was the successful proponent for the community survey for 2014. And Leo Hussey is here. He's from Forum Research. He's VP of Client Services. He's been in the industry for over 15 years and involved in many, many citizen satisfaction surveys across the country. And he's going to take us through the results of our survey.
Thank you. Okay, so as Bonnie had mentioned, the survey was conducted in September, October of this year. We did a survey of around 800 citizens across the wards of Newmarket, proportionate to their population. And we have really a lot of good news in this particular study to share with you today. There is a results summary which you may want to review after we go through the results, but I thought we'd go right into the questionnaire, really item by item, and provide you with the highlights from this particular study. There were a number of key performance indicators that were included in the survey, such as value for money and overall satisfaction, and we'll talk a little bit about what those are and how well you're doing. The first question that we asked about was around the town of Newmarket as a place to live. Respondents were given a 4-point scale to respond, either very satisfied, satisfied, dissatisfied, or very dissatisfied. And consistent with historical data, we found that the top two box, in other words, the very satisfied and satisfied score, is very consistent year over year at 95% this year. Also, in terms of very satisfied, on par with 2010. And the percent satisfied is also very similar. So the results for this particular key performance indicator are very high and quite stable over the past really decade. Another key performance indicator that we like to track is around satisfaction with local municipal government. So the statement is, how satisfied are you with the town of Newmarket local municipal government? Are you very satisfied, satisfied, dissatisfied, or very dissatisfied? This particular metric had been trending downward somewhat since 2002. It was at 80 back in 2002, 74, top two box in 2005, and eventually at 71 in 2010. The good news is that it seems to have rebounded significantly since 2010 to land at 78%, statistically on par with 2002. You saw growth in the very satisfied, the top box on that particular measure predominantly. So, that's very good news. Another question which we don't have any historical data on that was added to the survey this year was around the value for taxpayer dollars. So there's a bit of an introduction to this particular question in terms of trying to have them understand just to what extent their taxes go to municipal services or regional services and so on. So it was read out that 39% of their tax bill actually goes to supporting town services. So in that kind of a context, for the services that you receive, do you consider that you get very good value, fair, poor, or perhaps they don't know? They might not have lived in the municipality long enough. So the result was generally that 84% of residents are saying that they receive at least fair value for their taxpayer dollars. That's very consistent with what we find not just in municipal services, but generally in the private sector as well, around value for money. That's generally how the data would fall out. In terms of key performance indicators, we've added some questions to the survey this year to try to capture what might be considered a citizen engagement index. Now, this is not fixed in stone. These are not statements that are that anyone's tied to or hanging their hat on at the end of the day. We basically look at what happens in the private sector in terms of customer experience, and customer satisfaction used to be a big performance indicator over decades, really. But then companies started to realize that it's not so much measuring satisfaction because it doesn't predict behavior. What they wanted to understand was the extent to which customers become loyal. And loyalty is a kind of a behavioral outcome. Another example would be on employee engagement. People may be satisfied with their jobs, but they might not be behaving in the way that you would like to see, especially for customer-facing employees. So behavioral outcomes tend to have a positive result on companies' bottom lines and the overall value of the organization. So what companies have done is move away from just measuring satisfaction with customers or employees to measuring loyalty or engagement. And to some extent, that's possible to do within a municipality as well. We hear a lot about citizen engagement, and that tends to be around getting involved in the decisions and feeling that kind of connection to the community. But a citizen engagement index as a key performance indicator could vary by municipality, and in fact it does. And in this case, what was decided, we'd look at three statements around, would you recommend Newmarket as a place to live? that they plan to reside in Newmarket for the foreseeable future, and that they often get involved in the community through cultural events, celebrations, rec programs, volunteering, or in other ways. If a citizen is doing all of those things, that would be considered an engaged citizen. And there are things that you could be doing to promote that or increase the level of that kind of behavior, if that's what you would want to see in your citizens. So the net result of those three statements would result in a citizen engagement index of 73, which, put into context, is similar to like an employee engagement or a customer loyalty index. They tend to be around anywhere from 65 to about 80. So 73 is a good solid score. Now, for priorities for council, there's a few ways that organizations have attempted to come up with priorities. We changed it a little bit this year from what was done in the past. What was done in the past was a rather open-ended question around what do you think should be the top 3 priorities. So in this kind of question, anything could really come to mind. In fact, it could be things that are not within the domain of a municipal government. It could be things that are more regional or perhaps provincial. So, and often top of mind, the first 3 things that come out of someone's mouth while they're on a phone may not be necessarily consistent with other things that you're considering doing as a municipality, things that are really on the table. There may be 5 or 10 topics or issues that you're really grappling with and thinking about investing in. And if somebody were to be presented with those 5 or 10 items and to rank them in some kind of hierarchy, how would that all fall out, as opposed to just leaving it all up to the top-of-mind mentions of respondents? So this question, we took some of the open-ended comments from the past and translated them into statements where people could agree on a 10-point scale from 1 to 10, and each of them were read out. So it gives you a fairly good idea of whether, the top item, preserving of natural areas and green spaces, is a high importance to a lot of people compared to, affordable housing or enhancing access to online services. So everybody was exposed to these 10 items, roughly 10, and provided with an opportunity to rate each one of them. So at the top we see preserving natural areas and green spaces, local jobs for residents at nearly 7 out of 10, and maintain quality of indoor and outdoor municipal facilities, followed somewhat closely by the management of growth and development. Those would be like the top 4, with more than 2/3 of respondents saying that those were important. So those might be, some areas that you might want to prioritize. Now, satisfaction with services and programs is the next component of our survey. We asked about dozens of service areas. Firstly, we saw some questions around recreation, culture, programs, and satisfaction. The good news here is that for the most part, most of these items have increased since the last survey in 2010. So the order of this table is based on percentage point increase or decrease since 2010. Some things are obviously performing very well, such as the walking, bikes, and trails is at 86%. The community special events is at 84%. And then you have some other items in around 75 and so on. The ones that increased the most were the youth rec programs at 14 percentage points, the walking, bikes, and trails at 11 percentage points, and the aqua and swimming programs at 9. So those would be the top 3 improvements in the recs and culture programs since 2010. Rec and culture facility satisfaction was the next area of the survey, and we asked about the youth center, the skate park, the skating facilities, the sports facilities, and the aqua facilities. Again, very strong improvements since 2010, particularly in the youth center and the skate park at 13 percentage points, and the skating facilities going up 7 percentage points. Another area we asked about was public works service satisfaction. This was comprised of statements around the park maintenance, water supply, grass cutting, and so on, down to snow plow and street sweeping. For the most part, there were some improvements, but this is an area that seemed to have seen the most, proportionally anyway, the most decreases from 2010, particularly with the street sweeping and the snow plowing. Now, last year was a particularly bad winter, as I'm sure we all recall, and as a skier, I'm hoping for another bad winter. Parks maintenance and water supply and grass cutting and the boulevard maintenance, those increased the most, between 9 and 5 percentage points since 2010. Another positive results for the safety and community services. You'll see, very high ratings for like the fire and service emergency services. Had been, around 92. It even managed to increase a little bit up to 94. Parking enforcement, bylaw enforcement, and animal control areas which have moderate satisfaction levels, but at least they're trending higher since 2010. And another area that was asked about had to do with just what we'd call like other services. They don't really fit into some of the other categories. They're around interaction with the customer service center, public consultation, and the Town of Newmarket website. We don't have any data on historically on the website, but the service center and the public consultation municipal process seem to have gone down by 10 percentage points or 14 percentage points in the case of the consultation. So that's generally how you're doing in terms of service satisfaction. The next question that we asked about had to do with, we may want to make some improvements to some of these areas. So if they were willing to, see the funding, because obviously improvements need to be funded somehow. So the question came down to if they weren't satisfied with the snow plowing, for example, would you like to see that improvements be paid for by taxes or fees or both? So depending on what they said in the other questions that we just went through in terms of their satisfaction, they may have been led to a question around, how should improvements be improved from a funding point of view. And the green boxes generally show where the majority of people would reside, other than not willing to pay. I don't know how they would expect services to be improved in ways that wouldn't result in taxes or fees or some kind of funding, but without another source. I think that really comes down to the extent of which people would say they expect things to just be done more efficiently, and that there's I guess some system improvements that could be made that would create efficiencies that money could get. But assuming that things are being done as efficiently as possible, where would you expect the funding to come from? So for something like snow plowing, they would say it's taxes. They'd expect it from there. From the museum, it would seem to be fees that would be most desirable for funding for the improvements. There's a few other items where it's a bit of a mix between taxes and both, and I guess in those cases you could either do both or just go with the taxes. The only other item that doesn't, which came down to a survey design issue was around the Town of Newmarket website, user fees or taxes or something like that. So it's, I don't know how you would have user fees for a website, but that's just kind of how the questionnaire was programmed. But anyway, around the rec programs, again, certainly around fees, and for the museum around fees. The rest tend to be around taxes or perhaps both, if it's possible. So we've gone through a number of questions around how satisfied people are. We've talked about some priorities that might exist for council in terms of the bigger sort of like long-term strategies. But in terms of focusing on your priority areas for improvement amongst the services that you provide, what had been done in the past was you can begin to ask people about how important all those services are. So we could ask them how important are, parks and trails, how important is street sweeping. The problem with stated importance, and I'll just take a moment to kind of explain how we do things a little bit differently, is that when it comes to stated importance, we're not sure what it's important in relation to. And I'll give you an example of a transit survey that we might do where we'd ask people how important their personal safety is. Their personal safety is obviously going to be very important. But they could give us a very high satisfaction rating on it. They could give us a very high it's important rating. It's often probably the most important thing on a transit satisfaction survey. But when it comes to overall how satisfied are you with the transit service, they might be not satisfied at all. So there isn't any particular correlation between their satisfaction with the safety on the transit and their overall satisfaction, but yet they said it was important. So what we want to understand is what's important in terms of the services that you're providing as they relate statistically to some of those key performance indicators that we talked about earlier. We could use value for money, we could use engagement, we could use satisfaction with the town as a place to live, and overall satisfaction with the services provided by the town of Newmarket. Those are 4 different outcomes or metrics, and some of the services that you provide may be more or less statistically related to some of those outcomes. If we could understand the extent to which the ones that you're doing well on or not so well on, as well as the extent to which they are or more or less important in relation to some of those indicators, we can come up with some priorities for you and say, these items are the ones that are the most important to drive that variable higher, that outcome higher. Have the strongest statistical relationship with that particular outcome variable or that statement. Once we understand that, we can also decide, well, which ones have the most room for improvement? If you're already at 90% on some items, well, there's not a whole lot of room for growth. But if you're at 30 or 40 or 50% satisfaction level on some of those items, there's a lot of opportunity to improve. And if you can improve in those areas, that will translate into significant increases in some of those key performance indicators that we're, at the end of the day, trying to understand and drive higher. So, this is a priority, what we call a priority matrix, and the colors basically come from the areas of the survey that we talked about. The A items had to do with, if I'll just flip back so we can understand where this is coming from. So these are the items that are A, these would be the items from B, these would be the items from the C section of the survey, D, and eventually E. So A, which tend to be blue, and we had several statements in there, I guess about 11 or 12 of them from that first section. Some of those, have more or less importance with satisfaction, or satisfaction with the town as a place to live. This is the first variable that we're going to try to predict. And, you know, you're doing fairly well on most of them, A13. I'll summarize this in a moment, but I just want you to understand a little bit about how the analytics works. So in terms of your primary strengths, we'd say like A13, A8, A9, A12, and so on. Those are the strengths from that section of the survey. There's other ones that are not particularly as important, such as A3, A10, A6. But what kind of comes across when we look at satisfaction with the town as a place to live is that it's really, the priorities tend to be around the items in D. And as I say, I'll summarize this in a moment. Some of C and one or two items from B and E. So essentially what we're saying is if you focused on those areas, B4, C8, E3, I'll let you know what they are in a moment, and could increase the satisfaction with those items, the next time you do the survey, if you could increase satisfaction with those items, the next time you do a survey, the percentage of people who say that they are satisfied with the town as a place to live would have a corresponding increase. So that's why it's important. It's important because those things drive that variable. We know it has a statistical relationship to that particular variable. The priorities would be a little bit different if you were to focus on another item, which would be satisfaction with local municipal government. In this case, there are some similarities, but because it's a different variable, some items may be more or less related to that. So at the end of the day, what we try to do is get organizations to think about what is it that you want to have as your overall key performance indicator. Perhaps it's satisfaction with the town as a place to live, or with the local municipal services, or engagement, or value for money, or something else. We felt it was probably going to come down to satisfaction with the town as a place to live, or satisfaction with the local municipal government, the services provided by the local municipal government. So at the end of the day, that's what you really are as an organization most in control of. So to summarize all this data, essentially what we can do is say, from the first section of the survey, we had a priority around A2, and it was a driver, a priority area if you want to improve satisfaction with the local municipal government. It had to do with the adult rec programs. From the second section of the survey, in terms of satisfaction, we saw condition of the youth center. That was a driver of satisfaction as a town, as a place to live. We see some overlap, a little bit of overlap in the public works section, but as you can see in terms of the items that are with red check marks, there's 5 of those that drive satisfaction with the local municipal government, but only 2 of them drive satisfaction with the town as a place to live. So again, those are different key performance indicators, different outcomes, and depending on what you're trying to achieve as an organization, you may want to focus more heavily on those items in C if satisfaction with the local municipal government is your key performance indicator. Animal control, bylaw enforcement, parking enforcement, they tend to have a little bit more to do with the satisfaction with the town as a place to live. And the public consultation process and the town of Newmarket website, again, they are equal priorities for those 2 particular key performance indicators. I suppose a discussion maybe, you know, you could focus on all of those and drive both of them. It doesn't have to be an either or. If you're looking to, you know, focus on 10 items or 12, you know, that's how this analysis can help you formulate priorities for improvement for future projects. So the next section is on the common measurement tool. Again, this is, I guess, another organization, ICCS, and that does the design and the analysis around this. We'll just be presenting some of the highlights from the common measurement tool. The historical trending on this particular item, which was the past year mode of contact with municipal department services, essentially what we have to do is figure out how many people have had some kind of a contact, whether they visited or called in or did some kind of personal interaction with the municipal department. And it's been fairly consistent, I suppose. There's about 30% or somewhere around there over the past decade who haven't had any experience in the past year. I guess that's kind of explained in terms of like online transactions and that kind of stuff. Like even when it comes to paying taxes, people see that as being done more through their bank than through the municipal service. So there's about about 1/3 who have had no contact. So for the rest of them, they tend to have had contact in the form of in-person, by telephone, some by internet and email, very few by fax, or other ways. So coming into the main satisfaction with the services that they provided are going to be those 2/3 of people who've had some kind of contact within the past year. Most of it's been done in person for this particular survey, and next by telephone or the internet. Now, the area that they last accessed, the municipality or town department or service that they last accessed, this is important because when it comes to them rating their satisfaction with all of these items, we have to keep in mind what service or area they last accessed. And the majority of them, the largest proportion I should say, was in the customer service center, followed by the public works services, and then a little bit with the Parks and Recs, bylaw and finance department. But for the most part, it's customer service center and the public works services that they've had contact with, roughly about half the sample. And then there's other areas where not that they haven't had any access with it in the past year, it just wasn't their last one. Because we want to now ask them a series of questions around thinking about your last or most recent point of access. The first question that was asked was around overall satisfaction with the service. So whatever that service was, again, the service center or Parks and Rec or however they came, they gave a very consistent top two box score of 79%, which is on par with 2010. A little bit of growth, I suppose, in the top box, the very satisfied growth or area, but generally very stable results since 2010. A series of questions are then asked about the aspects of their most recent town or department service interaction, and these are the CMT core questions, and they eventually there will be a benchmark as to how you compare to other municipalities and organizations. Generally, overall, there's been strong improvement, particularly in the how satisfied you were with the staff who provided you with the service, and going up 8 percentage points since 2014 or 2010. There was some growth with the overall quality of the service and with the amount of time it took to get their service. Statistically on par, I guess, really since 2005 was the accessibility of the service or the product. The next items had to do with more around the staff, the personal contact. So there were about 8 statements that were asked around knowledgeable and competent. It was clear that they knew what to do if they had a problem, informed of everything in order to get the service or product, that they were treated fairly, that they were good listeners, courteous, respectful, extent to which they felt that people had gone the extra mile and the hours of service were convenient. So generally very stable results since 2010. The most growth was in the knowledgeable and competent staff, and it was clear what to do. It was clear what to do if I had a problem. Saw the most growth. Another indicator for this particular section of the survey had to do, for the CMT, had to do with historical trending of needs. So they were asked, based on your most recent experience and contact with the town, did you feel like your needs were, that you got what you needed, that you got part of what you needed, that you did not get what you needed, or perhaps they didn't know? Again, very consistent levels of since 2000, well, historically. We don't see any real statistically significant shifts here. There's been a slight drop in the percentage of people who say I got what I needed, down from 83 to 79. But otherwise, it's 10% saying they got what they needed, and 11% saying that only 11% saying they did not get what they needed. The CMT is benchmarked by the what you're seeing here is the mean score. So all these statements, timeliness, accessibility, overall satisfaction, they were all rated on a 5-point scale. So what you're seeing is your organization, in this case Newmarket, when it comes to timeliness, getting a 4.23 out of 5. And that's trended up by a slight 0.16 since 2010. Accessibility is also up slightly, but currently resting at 4.27 out of 5. The overall satisfaction, again, is up. In fact, they're all up since 2010. And then the satisfaction with staff at 4.4, treated fairly at 4.5, informed on what to do, 4.3. Staff going the extra mile is at 3.9, which tends to be the lowest of all the rated items that you've that are asked about in the CMT. But you're still doing better than you were, had at least trending in the right direction. Staff being good listeners, 4.3. Staff courteous, 4.5. Respectful, 4.6 basically. Clear what to do, 4.2, and the hours were convenient at 4.1, and knowledgeable staff at 4.4. Another section of the survey had to do with communications. Do you feel that the town provides adequate information on projects, programs, and or services? Generally, about 3/4 of the population would say, yeah, they feel that the town provides adequate information. Roughly 20% would say no to that. There's 7% who are unsure. And then in terms of how they prefer to get their information, obviously there's a few vehicles you have in terms of printing and mailing things out, emailing things, posting them on websites, or with social media now with Twitter, Facebook, and other social media outlets. There's many ways that you can try to communicate and share information with residents. And this year, the directly to my mailbox came out as the slightly lower than it was in 2010. It dropped from 58% in 2010 to 45%. Similarly, there was a bit of a drop in the town Thursday ERA newspaper. It went down from 51 to 33. We see a bit of an increase in people who are preferring to get things through email. It's gone up from 21 to 34%. Otherwise, fairly stable on the other communication channels. Another thing we did in this particular survey was asked about the, we had a component of the survey where we could dive a little deeper into some topics through an IVR. So the IVR is basically an interactive voice recognition methodology where we would read out the questions. It's kind of recorded, and the respondent would answer by pressing a number on their phone pad. So that's kind of the methodology. It's often referred to as robo-dialing or whatever. So what we're going to look at here are the results from our IVR poll. It was conducted November 10th. We did about 400 surveys and weighted the data by age and gender within the town of Newmarket. The first questions had to do with the recreation and culture programs. There was a desire to do a little bit of a deep dive on that in terms of participation and value for money. So the first question which was asked of respondents was, have you or one of your dependents participated in the town of Newmarket rec and programs within the last 2 years? So approximately half have participated in the last 2 years. And then there was a follow-up question to that, which is around, you know, was it a drop-in program or a pre-registration program? Two-thirds of those who had participated have done so through a pre-registration program.
See, the presentation doesn't seem to match the hard copy. Is there? Are we missing something here? Is that the concern, Councillor?
Yes. There are two different presentations, a hard copy and presentation. I don't know if I'm the only one, but I just noticed
Page 40? So it's just in different areas, not necessarily in the same order. Okay. All right, maybe if we could, if we're changing to different pages, if there's reference points, then that would be helpful. Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay. So the, well, I'll go back to the participation in the rec programs is about 50% in the past 2 years, and the two-thirds of those who have participated have done so through a pre-registration program. And a third have done so through a drop-in program. And then the question around value for money for those who had participated, roughly 95% would say that they get at least fair, good, or very good value for money. Again, even in terms of good and very good, we're looking at roughly 70% of people who are saying that they're getting good or very good value for money. The next question was around the cost for the rec and culture programs and how they should be paid for, perhaps through user fees or by the participant or some combination of both. So these total costs for the programs could be divided in a few ways. The majority, when it came to the dealing with program costs, felt that the total cost should be split between the participant and the tax base at 65%. 23% are saying it should be paid for by the participant, and the remaining 12% are saying it should be paid for by the taxes. So then the next question, which was asked for the rec programs, had to do with subsidies, perhaps some subsidies based on age, ability to pay, or a person's persons with disabilities. The one that had the most resounding, I guess, agreement with a subsidy had to do with the disabilities, persons with disabilities. Ability to pay, again, around 81% saying yes to that, and then based on age, it was 71%. But again, there does seem to be some openness to subsidies based on willingness or ability to pay, age, and persons with disabilities. The final series of questions had to do with the from our IVR had to do with just whether or not they have a good understanding of how their tax dollars are spent. Generally, 66% would flat out come out and say, no, I really do not have a good understanding of how my taxpayers' dollars are actually spent. 34% would say yes. So then that was followed up with a question around, are you interested in increasing your level of understanding or not? As you could expect, those who have had have the sense that they do have a good understanding, most would say that they're not interested in increasing their level of understanding. But even still, 46% would say, yeah, I'd still like to know more. For those who don't have the information required, nearly 4 out of 5 would say that they would be interested in increasing their level of understanding. So roughly 70% of the population. And now, how would you go about that? There were a few options around, printed material, attending seminars, or information on the town website. And the one that seemed to appeal to most was the information on the town website at 53%. Attending town seminars, town halls was only around 8%. And getting printed material is 40%. And that's it, right? Okay. Okay, so that brings us to the end of the presentation and all the results from the community survey, the CMT portion, the IVR poll. So.
I have a couple of councillors in the queue. Councillor Sponga, question?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you very much for the presentation. It's very informative and truly an eye-opener. Great news, I think, is to hear that the level of satisfaction with our staff has increased and it's just getting better. So that's fantastic to hear. I have a number of questions. I'm going to try to get through the presentation. On page 11, is there any other municipal comparators for, let me get to it here, in terms of measuring the loyalty and engagement here, in terms of the key?
Yeah. Well, for benchmarking and comparisons, again, for engagement, what we find is that every company, every organization is going to have a slightly different engagement strategy. So what we recommend is that if that becomes I guess it kind of embedded into the culture of the town of Newmarket, as an indicator that you ultimately want to drive higher in its behavior that you do want to see in your citizens and something that you want to keep and track moving forward, that those three statements would be somewhat unique to you as an organization in terms of what it is you want to see amongst your residents. It might not be the same thing that Burlington or Milton or Oshawa want to see. They would all potentially have different engagement strategies. So we recommend that organizations try to understand what it is that they want to see either in their employees or their customers or their residents, and therefore come up with an index that is going to kind of measure that specifically. And then if you wanted to benchmark, again, we have the ability to do our IVR benchmarking, where we could administer those three questions either nationally or through a selection of relevant municipalities of a similar size, or perhaps in Ontario. Whatever the comparison is that you would want us to do to make it the most relevant. And we do it at a similar time of year to make sure that, the timing is the same, the questions are the same, the municipalities that we're comparing you to are relevant. So that's something that we could do, down the road if that's what you'd like.
That brings me to my actually a question that I had here. At what time was this, the data for the survey, was it taken throughout the last term, or was it taken a specific year and at a specific time of that year? So I'm just wondering if that has anything to do with some of the surveys, some of the data in reference to municipal engagement, in terms of whether the municipality is listening or not listening, in terms of municipal government, sorry. Mm-hmm. And also in terms of some of the questions that I've seen actually in another sheet that we didn't touch on. And I think it was on, let me just find it. It basically was a list of items that the municipality should be addressing, or was not or some of the residents were not satisfied. I think of Davis Drive and some of the other things were on that list. So was there a specific time of the year, or was the data taken throughout the whole term?
No, the data were collected in the fall of this year. So, and over a I guess, probably a week to 10-day period back in June and July. Yeah.
Okay. So would you expect that that data would have been different if it was taken, let's say, prior to, let's say, a Glenway OMB hearing? Would that have had any impact? Like, is it based on specific incidents or specific items that were important to the residents at that time?
There's always, I guess, consideration around the timing of a survey, especially for municipal services. If you, for example, do it in the spring after a harsh winter, some things may be fresher in people's minds than if you do it in the fall after a hot summer with lots of rain and other issues. So the timing of a survey is important, but what we hope to do is track the data using similar slices of time. The other option is you do split up the data collection across the seasons, maybe 4 times a year to capture each season, or twice a year. But if you're going to do it once a year, it's best to keep the data collection around the same time. So whatever those seasonal factors and influences are going to be, I guess, consistent wave after wave. There may be things going on in your municipality in terms of decisions that you're making around, infrastructure and spending that may be more top of mind at that particular time leading into a survey, which could influence what people are thinking. But generally, it gives you a pretty good idea of what people are thinking at this point in time to help you realize what you should be doing to make strategies in the immediate future.
And was the historic data taken at this, I would assume, well, not necessarily, because the other thing is if you've taken that data this fall, they're also reflective of the heightened engagement because it's an election year. So I'm just wondering, like, I know 2010 was an election year. Was it taken at the same, historically, I know 2002 wasn't, but was it historically taken at the same time of the year?
Yeah, I think it's been the same methodology.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mr. Sheldon?
Mr. Mayor, we try to do the survey the same time each time we do the survey, so it is in June and July. The work that that was done in the fall was more diving down into specific areas in the recreation fees. And in terms of what might influence the results, we've had that discussion around the steering committee. You do have different things, such as we did run into the issues with the garbage collection contract. With the winter where you might have the road swept, you get another snowfall, you put sand down, you sweep it again. So you can dive down into the specific results to see if there were some specific factors that may have determined the results. But it's a guide, and we try to keep it consistent year over year. And in addition to that, the questions, like the Citizen First questions, are similar. And I did want to say one thing on the Citizen Engagement Index. This was something that was proposed by Forum as something we might want to consider, and we'd be looking to Council's direction to go forward in the future with it. So it would give us a benchmark to aim for, and one of the points that was made in our discussion was on involvement. We do hear about there's sort of a limited number of people that jump in and volunteer, and that's starting to wane a little bit. So you can see that perhaps in the results, and you can develop strategies to deal with that. So if you're interested in, henceforth, that we include that Citizen Engagement Index, we then have something to measure ourselves against, and you can have strategies to help you improve in that area.
May I continue? I have a couple more.
Okay, I do have others in the queue.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I'll be brief. On involvement, through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Shelton, this is something that is systemic right now through any organization in terms of, especially when you're talking about volunteers, if you look into service clubs and so forth, it's something to do with demographics, and it's a cyclical sort of problem that occurs, which brings me to another question. It's interesting to see that there's a lot of satisfaction in terms of community events, youth programming, parks and recreation. Our parks seems to be well maintained. People are satisfied with that, and there seems to be a heavy call for improvement in areas such as the youth center and youth-related, some of the youth-related items. Is this, is there a demographic sector that was targeted, or is this a broad demographic sector? And do you have those demographic numbers? I think they are somewhere here in the survey. I know there's some ethnic numbers as well. But is there any indication that we're becoming a younger town? Or is this an indication of that?
Well, the data is collected proportionate to your population by ward. We weight the data by age and gender. So the proportion of 18 to 24-year-old males from Ward 1, all the data are weighted to be representative of what's true of your population. So these results would be considered representative and reliable and not influenced by a bias from a sampling point of view with, younger people or older people or, that sort of stuff. So.
Okay. Finally, I've got a couple of more slides, but I got questions, but I can take them up later. Page 32 of the report really concerned me, and I was hoping you were going to touch on it. Is there any significance to this, or is just, and again, one of the suggestions, Mr. Shelton, would it be a good idea perhaps to reconsider taking this data during an election year? Because it would skew, I believe to a certain extent, it must skew the data that you're getting, because there's that heightened, this was a very negative campaign that started very early. So I wouldn't be surprised if that had undertone had anything to do with some of the data we received, and especially as it's reflected in page 32.
Mr. Sheldon?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That is something that we can look at, but that's one of the reasons why we do try to make sure that we deal with the public in terms of the phone calls for the main survey prior to the end of June. Generally, that's a deadline that we aim for, and it's consistently done that way. You can deal with it in a different manner. We look at it that the residents generally are being asked to speak to the services that they receive. But, again, if that's something that you'd like us to look at, what is the practice elsewhere, we can certainly do that.
Thanks. I was asking, could you explain what this page is?
Page 32?
32.
So the additional, just want to make sure I've got the right page 32,
Yeah.
the additional comments and suggestions for improvement?
Correct.
Okay, so the survey, basically, we've obviously asked them about a bunch of areas that they can provide satisfaction with. And it's an open-ended question at the end of the survey to just say, is there anything that we, might have overlooked or didn't include in the survey? Is there anything else that you would like to, we give them an opportunity to say, what's really on their mind, and it might have been, they might just reinforce something that they've, heard in the survey and just reiterate it. They might just take a moment to vent. They might also just take an opportunity to talk about something that we didn't ask in the survey. So that's what this is, and it's really just a summary of open-ended responses to that particular question.
Okay. And is that weighed into then the two key performance indicator, whether it's satisfaction with government or satisfaction with or the two measurements?
No, this is just it's just the frequencies of how many people said better communicate. For example, better communication with the public services, slower stop the pace of development of new buildings. So when they're asked this, like we don't take this and look at it in terms of is it driving engagement or any other. This just remains in and of itself an open-ended display of what people said to that question. And if it turns out that there are things in here that are areas of concern or services that we didn't track, we might want to add questions to future surveys to make sure we're tapping into these things if they are service areas or touch points that residents might have with the town of Newmarket that you want to get a better read on. The thing is, some people might mention it, 20% might mention it, but 80% of people could agree it's an issue. We don't know, going from the percent of mentions, to how many people would agree, that you should be doing a better job on this. But it gives us an idea of would we want people to agree or disagree or say how satisfied they are for future surveys.
And what was the question?
What additional comments or suggestions, sorry, it's right at the bottom. Do you have any additional comments or suggestions about what the town of Newmarket could do to achieve customer service excellence in the future?
And of course, you can take any of those answers and relate it to the different areas, A, B, C, D, E.
Oh, yeah,
Whatever you make.
for sure.
Thank
So
you.
some of them would. That's right.
Councillor Hempin?
Thank you, and thanks for the presentation, too. The sampling and getting in contact with residents of the town, was it done strictly randomly, or?
Yes.
Okay. I don't know if your company's ever done this. You know, as a counselor, I see that sometimes I may be in contact with less than 1% of the residents of my ward, and I'm not sure what percentage that we as a town through customer service actually speak with and contact us with concerns or trying to get things done. So I don't know if your company has ever looked at this before, targeting the people that we know have contacted us with concerns, and how we're standing up to that. That would be the most relevant information for myself. This is great information. I appreciate that we're contacting people randomly, but we're not sure what kind of interaction we've had with them over a number of years, and I'm not sure what that is. So as a suggestion, that's what I would like to see happen, is to know where we are, is to get in touch with the people we know we've had contact with and had concerns, and getting that information from them.
Exit interviews almost after transaction.
Yeah, and get that sampling from randomly from people we know we've been in contact with.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. McDougall, you were in the queue.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just quickly, just on Councillor Sponga's point, if I may, he asked a question around youth and youth centre, and I just wanted to make the point of, with a survey like this, it is actually done through the lens of respondents that are all over the age of 18, and so that is a reality of a survey such as this. So just to add some context, through the Recreation Playbook process, the young people themselves are engaged in community consultation. So that will be a nice piece in concert with this to actually show a true reflection of things like the youth centre and youth programming. So it may paint a bit of a different picture when we get the feedback directly from the youth. And then the other point while I'm speaking is, on the IVR questions, there were some questions specifically around pricing and subsidy, and one of the rationales around focusing on drilling down in that regard is, in mid-January, Council will be going through an exercise as part of the playbook process with a consultant to talk about philosophy of pricing and to talk about subsidies and to talk about things of that nature. So it really does give us some initial input that will help inform that discussion in mid-January.
Thank you. Councillor Bassans?
Thank you very much for the presentation. There's a wealth of data in here, and I'm particularly interested in sort of the recurring theme around communications, and we've discussed it through the questions, and either satisfaction with or dissatisfaction with. Certainly, you know, we're hearing that top concerns are the need for better communication, sense that councillors are out of touch, which again relates to the need to be getting information or input from the residents. And certainly public consultation was an area that we saw with significant dissatisfaction and even a significant decline since the 2010. But I find it interesting that when we ask people how they want to receive information or to be involved and informed with decision-making, they're looking more to get information through email or written information. In your experience, have you ever sort of come up with some best practices or how you reconcile this sense of we don't feel that we're being consulted or have an opportunity to provide input or have a say in decisions, and yet this disconnect between, you know, how they want to be engaged in the decision making more from the standpoint of receiving information as opposed to a two-way dialogue?
Yeah, I mean, the communication is obviously key. Sometimes people will want to get more involved with the providing the input, but even sometimes they don't even find out about the decisions that they could have been involved with until after the decisions have been made, and then they become a little bit upset that they weren't involved. So it's a bit of a, you're right, it's a bit of a two-way exchange between, you know, letting people know that, you know, their input is valued, and when and where they can come to provide input. Now, some municipalities will start to develop a citizen panels almost, so that people can join and have a say in what it is that they want to participate in through a variety of means. They can actually come in person. They can send emails. They can do surveys, and it's an opportunity to provide people with a way to keep them informed and allow them to participate in a way that's convenient for them. But it's very difficult. I think municipalities are more and more trying to be more seen as consultative and actively participating. But no matter what best effort you put forth, there's whatever decision you make, there will be only so many people who can participate at that time and in that way in those decisions that you're trying to make. So you could do a consulting project just around that particular topic of how would we do this in this particular municipality.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bloom-Prumley.
Thank you. Better communication and understanding of the services seems to be a significant driver that I'm seeing throughout this report, and I appreciate the report and the graphs. It's very helpful. A lot of the things that I'm seeing in the report were very consistent with what I saw in the past year and are consistent with my concerns as a resident as well. I'd like to ask that these numbers be provided to each of us, if interested, separated by ward, because I think we'd have a better snapshot of the questions more specifically related to our ward as opposed to the town as a whole.
Yeah. So we do have the ward as a item in the survey. We know who was in Ward 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. So we can certainly break out the data, we've seen this a few different ways. We will talk about how that would work, but for example, like if there are differences, like this was the highest in Ward 2, this particular item. So we can give, instead of just a dump of here's everything for Ward 2, we could say this was highest in Ward 2, or so it becomes a bit more of a summary document. So if you wanted to know what's highest, like what did Ward 5 win on, or lose on, or was that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. Or we can just give you all the results for every item for your particular ward, and you might say, oh, they were, I got an 80% on this or a 60% on this, but whether or not you want to know whether that was higher or lower than the other wards, we can give you one ward level report where it would just show every item by ward and who was the highest and who was the lowest. So there's lots that we can do at the ward level.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
We actually just received a report from customer service in terms of comparing all the wards, so you could start seeing where the issues are. And I think from a town-wide basis, and I think it's good for all members of council to have an understanding of where are some of these issues or some of these concerns stronger, because I think eventually we all become engaged in making decisions for specific areas. So it's good for Councillor Kerwin, for example, to understand that parking was a big issue in Ward 6 and 7. So I think that comparison is good, and then it can help us prioritize the areas that we prioritize in terms of some of these projects. So that might be helpful for us if we could use that format. And I'll leave it up to you to see if that can be arranged.
Yes, if you could, Mr. Mayor, just we'll find out what we can encourage Leo to give us within the current terms of reference, and what goes beyond that. If it is a full duplicate of the report based on 7 wards, that might be, if that's what you're looking for, we'll have to find out what that entails. If it is more along the lines of, what's the highest in each ward, that may be an easier exercise for us to do. So any specificity you can give to us in that regard would help.
Okay, Councillor Kerwin and then Councillor Sponga.
Really briefly, Leo, have you ever given seminars, or your company, on how to interpret surveys or information? or even misinformation, because that's crucial in any survey, because I see that you're an accredited Gold Seal corporate member of the Marketing Research and Intelligence Association. I know a little bit about intelligence. Okay. I've been trained in that, actually, and I say that publicly. Now, to me, it's absolutely crucial when I get this survey. It's not like a newspaper. I don't read a newspaper. I read between the lines in a newspaper. And that's what a good staff reporter is trained to do. Have you ever given a presentation on that? Because I've seen them given, and they're very important to people who are in the public sector or in the military. Go ahead.
Forum Research, the owner and president of the company, Dr. Lauren Bosanoff, has been an active member of the MRIA for many years. He's got, I think, 15 PhDs from the University of Toronto, and has given extensive lectures and seminars on marketing research principles, methodologies, and statistics.
Great. I just make a suggestion here. I mean, you can't make, well, I guess you can make suggestions. I think that's very important coming down the road in 4 years. And quite frankly, I would love to see that included in our educational system as we go forward. I think it's so important for people.
It isn't so much information as what information tells you and how it guides your decisioning
Absolutely.
processes. So it's a good point.
And that's it's more. It's going beyond this. This is fine, but as I go through it today, I only interpret it because I'm a master of misinformation. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Sheldon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. No,
Mr. Sheldon.
Yeah, we had talked about making this a working lunch if there were more questions. So the one thing that Leo did mention at the outset, and perhaps we should go back to it, is the executive summary. We've gone through a lot of the detail just to bring it back up to the level. These are very good results, and I think that the executive summary does summarize that. You know, and they will help to guide us in terms of council setting their strategic priorities and communication determining, you know, better methods to proceed on. And I did want to just come back to the timing of the exercise as well. I've been reminded that one of the reasons for doing it at that time is to get ready for the new council coming in to set their strategic priorities. And in a sense, doing it before June of the final year of a term, it is a report card on the organization, council staff, for what has happened over that term. And the results are good, and I think the executive summary will show that as a total piece.
Good.
Want me to go back
To your point, Mr. Sheldon, though, it's, you know, if this is a scorecard for us, it's like going to a soccer game and checking the goal after the game is over. If every 4 years, right, and one of the things that I wanted to first clarify, this is statistically significant, number one. I think you can confirm that.
Yep.
But number two is the value of information is what you can do with it. And so maybe we should seriously think, as we go through our strategic priorities, should we be measuring ourselves every year to see if we're moving the bar? Because we don't want to wait until year 4 and find out we didn't move the bar. In year 2, we might say, that didn't work, what else should we try? So I'll leave that for a consideration as we set our strategic priorities. The question is annual surveys, are they valid, and do they create the value that you're looking for? Go ahead.
Absolutely. Well, basically, you know, what
I
gets measured...
I heard the cash register ring with that answer.
No, it's not.
Yeah, no.
Well, it's basically what gets measured gets done. So if at the end of the day, you know, you use this data to help you understand what the priorities should be and where you need to improve and funding issues and so on, and then you'll make some decisions and investments and strategies be put in place, then where are you going to be at year 2 and year 3 and year 4? Are you moving the needle on any of these metrics? Is important to understand as opposed to, you know, at the end of it all. The other thing is whether you do half of your 800 in the spring and half in say the fall, or get that seasonal element as well. That's another thing that we've talked about in terms of not just the frequency of your annual surveys, but when some data collection might want to be shared amongst to get that seasonal factor. But yeah, we've certainly talked about that.
Okay, Councillor Sponga.
Yeah, the level of, thank you, Mr. Mayor. The level of satisfaction with this municipal government would increase considerably if those surveys yearly were pro bono. I can guarantee you that. On the IVRs...
Are you sure about that?
The IVRs, are they the measurement in terms of a dollar for value? And are they, as they relate to subsidies, were they related specifically to fees or specifically to taxes or both?
Well, both, but it was just whether, sorry, I'm just going to go back to the question here. So do you believe that there should be subsidies to help cover the cost of programs for the, based on age, a person's ability to pay? So it's just a yes, no. Like that's how the question was, but whether the subsidy itself.
No, sorry, I'm actually looking for your slide on page 41.
That's our page 41.
Our
What
page 41,
What
sorry.
page what's his page number? Are they the same?
Not sure.
No, they're different.
41.
What's the bottom page number, Joe?
39.
39, okay.
There.
Yeah, that's the same one. Yeah.
That one?
Yeah, that's the one. The one we have right here in front of us now.
Okay, so sorry, what's the question?
Is this based on value for money? Is it based on taxation, or is it based both on fees and taxation?
Well, again, I mean, depending on which programs they've used, that they've done the drop-in programs and the pre-registration programs. At this point, all we know is 66% do the pre-registration program and 34% have done the drop-in. So the value for money question depends on, you know, what program they're using and whether it's funded from
fees
or both.
Okay,
or
so it could be both.
I don't know how many would be.
And the overall money for value, this is just related to programs, though.
Yeah, for the
Right.
last program that they've participated in, would they consider that they value the value for that
Right.
experience?
But you also had a slide, and I don't have the number here, that looked at overall the residents, whether they were satisfied with the value for money or not.
Overall, that's right.
Right.
Yeah.
So is that the overall include fees and taxes, or is it broken down? Are people getting value for their taxes, and do they feel that they get value for their taxes? One
Yeah.
question. Second, are they getting value for the programs that they pay fees for?
Okay.
So that gives me an indication whether fees are at a reasonable level, or whether people are willing to pay more taxes.
Okay. So the first one that you mentioned around this question is based on the services that are provided, based on the amount of the taxes that they pay going toward paying for municipal services. So we say 39% of your tax bill goes to supporting town services, along with user fees collected. Would you say you receive?
Okay, along with user fees, okay. There it is, right there at the end. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you so much.
Thank you. Mr. Sheldon, good point. I think I'd like to come back to the executive summary because we'll try and see if we can wrap this up by 12:30. I don't want to miss the good news message on this, and I'd like to see that in the summary. This information will come back to us in different forms as we go through the strategic planning process. So we'll have an opportunity to interpret this information, to clarify the information, and use it in our decision-making process. So if there's any further questions, we'll have an opportunity to come back to that, and probably our customer service group, or who should we go back to clarify? Mr. McDougall? If we have more questions on the Okay, so we can get more information as we go forward. If you could give us the highlights, and then we can wrap this up on the positive note that it deserves to be wrapped up on.
All right. Well, we're happy to say that the results for the 2014 survey are very positive. We saw a 95% satisfaction with Newmarket as a place to live, consistent with historical levels. 84% of respondents say that they're receiving at least fair value for their taxpayer dollars. 78% are saying that they're satisfied with the local municipal government, and this has trended higher since the last survey. More than half, 19 of 32 programs have recorded increases in performance from 2010. The largest gains we saw were in the youth and rec programs, up 14 points. The center and skate park up 13, and the walk and bike trails up 11. 4 out of 5 residents are indicating satisfaction with the services overall, with a statistically significant increase in performance for each of the CMT questions regarding service interaction. The largest increases in performance for the staff provided the service as well as quality of service overall, and residents indicated staff were knowledgeable and confident. That was up 6 percentage points. Staff was clear about what to do when they had a problem. That was up 5 percentage points. And residents were informed about everything that they had to do in order to get the service or product or information that they were initially contacting about. That's up 4 percentage points. So the top priorities for improvement for increasing both the satisfaction with town as a Newmarket as a place to live, as well as satisfaction with the local municipal government services, would be to focus on public consultation on municipal processes, the traffic control and safety measures, parking enforcements, and snow plowing for sidewalks. Those would be the 4 key priorities to increase both of those.
Thank you very much. Now, before we recess, I think we need to pass a motion to go to in-camera. But before we do that, I want to extend my congratulations on to staff. I know that many times that we have our service recognition, and we say to our staff, you are the front line, you are the town of Newmarket to our customers. And so these results are jointly owned, but very much owned by the people that you manage and that you supervise, and you should be very proud of those results. And so before we recess, I'll ask for a motion to that the council workshop resolve into a closed session for the purpose of education training under section 239, bracket 3.1 of the Municipal Act regarding strategic matters and intermunicipal relations. Can I have a motion to that effect, please? Councillor Kerwin, Councillor Vague, all those in favor? Okay, and we'll recess now and reconvene in a closed session as part of the strategic priorities discussions, okay? Thank you.